Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of the War Report. Not just another episode. We're joined by our semi-regular guest, Gio. He is back to help us cover a lot of
Ooh.
ground that we don't
Ah.
normally know how to cover in his absence. Just a lot of, let's say, off the beaten path stories that who else would you turn to in order to talk about these sort of things?
I
Um,
said to Elon, the rocket, it's gonna go everywhere, but then the claws just
it,
like went out and grabbed it. I said, oh, that sucker. The flames are everywhere. The flames are everywhere. That reminds me, I was watching the Madison Square Garden Trump speech. That reminds me of that one where like Ricky, where he bought Bubbles on Trailer Park Boys, he bought Bubbles the rocket kit that then got run over by a drunk lady. And then they were like playing Spaceman or whatever. He goes, breaker, breaker, they're golfing, flames golfing everywhere. We gotta get some space weed. And he's like, space weed, Ricky? Like, you're not doing it right. You're not playing space right. That's yeah. We'll get to the Trump speech. We'll
oh
get to
yes,
it.
I,
We'll,
I look
Yeah,
I look forward to that greatly because
yeah, yeah,
there's a
definitely.
lot of Trump nonsense, both for good and for ill, that we do need to cover that I look forward to. But we do have some, of course, minor topics like the war in Ukraine to take care of first.
yeah.
Yes. Okay, so let's get to the
Get to
minutia
this
minute.
exact minute.
That's exact minute. So, first map is just an overview of where sort of the hottest fighting and the biggest gains are taking place right now on the Ukraine front. As you can see, it's all in the Donetsk region, but the westernmost extremity is almost bordering on Zaporozhye, so that's around the Vermevsky Ledge. As you can see, there's lots of gains. In recent days, I think Friday or Saturday, the Russians made 70 square kilometer gains. Today, they extended that. The day before, I think Thursday, there was a 54-kilometer gain. So, the big story basically is that the mismanagement of the Ukrainian military command has been to insist upon Kursk at the expense of Donetsk and other regions, as we'll find out. So let's then begin with the westernmost extremity from the map. Let's zoom in. And you're going to see that the Russians have captured all the territory north of Stepove, and they're moving towards what is it, Novodarovka. So um, they've made some gains here in the past, but then it went quiet for at least a month or two, and now they've kind of reactivated this front. The white outlines that you see basically show what the Russians have gained in the last week or so. Next map is a little east of there. This is the area immediately adjacent to Ugledar. So you can see bigger territorial gains here. They have taken Shakhstarsky. The Ukrainians have moved out of this region. Deep State, which is Ukrainian, a Ukrainian mapping outfit, they say that the Ukrainians have moved out of the town and are now in the fortifications north and west of it, as you can see. The Russians have a small toehold in it. They will probably take it because the ongoing issue with the Ukrainians, of course, is the loss of manpower at the moment. And, when Ugledar fell, part of the reason it fell is one of their best elite units, the 47th, or there was a detachment of the 47th there. But there was also, I believe, the 72nd, which is another strong unit for the Ukrainians, fought a lot in the Bakhmut area, both before and after Bakhmut fell. The 72nd just left, but so Ugledar has become a pivotal point. That's why you're seeing so much stuff happening in the south right now. Ugledar, of course, was this tiny city, but it was almost all apartment buildings built in the Soviet era, so they were very hard. The Russians bombed it to smithereens and still couldn't destroy everything. And what ultimately worked for them, though, is that they began attacking from the flanks and cutting off their supplies. And all the previous programs in September and October, Konstantin and I explained that. And now, the fruits of that labor are paying off. As you see, these are fairly large territorial gains, all things considered, with the way this war has been going, which has been, as is often said, an attritional war. The Russians do have a toehold, Nova Ukrainka, which has more fortifications. It's a little bit harder for them to get in, but they have a small toehold at the moment. The next slide, we're going to deal with where the really big news is, that for the last 3 days is known, was eventual, and that is the fall of Selydove. And so Selydove is in the Pokrovsk front. It is north of the area that I just described. There is a general overview of what it's like. And then if you zoom into the next one, to the next slide, you can see the chunk that the Russians have taken today. So Selydove was a town of 22,000 people when fighting broke out. And like Ugledar, it has a section that has high rises. This is where the Ukrainians held out the longest, but they began pulling out. And there were questions asked, why doesn't Russia completely encircle them? Interestingly, Weeb Union said that he brought this up in his stream today, but he's brought it up several times, this key point. And that is, as I said earlier, the 72nd Brigade that moved out of Ugledar said that of 10 men who would try to sneak out, 4 to 6 died. And that wasn't with the Russians completely storming into the city, but working on the flanks first. Of course, they did have to fight some parts of the city. But as soon as the Ukrainians know that supplies coming in are stopped, that is when they have to act. Now, they could fight conceivably to the end, which would cost the Russians arguably more time, but also more manpower and more machines. So the reason the Russians don't do it is because you suppose the attrition rate, going by what happened in Ugledar, will also be high for the Ukrainians, right? And your casualties will be lower. So that's why you don't want to completely encircle them. Another interesting fact is there's a channel called Bar Mapping, and they did an overview of the amount of territory that was taken in the Donetsk region between Avdiivka and Pokrovsk, beginning from February the 17th, which is when the Russians took Avdiivka, up until August 8th. Now, August 8th is kind of pivotal. Why? Because on August the 6th is when the first incursions into Kursk by the Ukrainians took place. And remember, the first day it was uncertain whether they had been pushed out or not, because there were not that many units. But by the 8th, it was obvious that the Ukrainians began to send even more troops and quickly began expanding the territory that they had taken there. So if you look at all the territory per square kilometers that the Russians managed to gain after the fall of Avdiivka in that central Donetsk region, outside of the city of Donetsk, to August the 8th, if you look at that as a total compared to from August 8th to mid-October, the amount of territory that the Russians gained from August 8th to mid-October is twice that, which was taken from February 17th to August 8th. And there's only one explanation for that. And that is that the Ukrainians wasted all these brigades that they had been training in a fruitless attempt to hold some kind of a ransom over the Russians in Kursk, and to impress upon people everything from, average citizens in the West that they had invaded Russia and, soon Moscow might fall. And I mean, they don't say that, but you know how people are, right? That are heavily emotionally invested in this. And it was also to impress upon, including NATO, but also they, it shouldn't be forgotten that they worked with NATO to do this, with emphasis on the British participation in it. But it was generally to grab some headlines. And it honestly, it did not pay off because they are now losing territory more quickly. It has accelerated. Basically, the Russian war machine is more competent, stronger, and bigger. And that's why you see a kind of accelerated and exponential increase in territorial gains by the Russians
They
than
say
what you saw.
800,000 troops by the end of the year. That's what
Yes,
Ukraine says.
right.
Yeah.
And so you can see that the territories are at stake now. You almost think that the Ukrainians are willing to lose them. I don't really know like what it is that they're doing. One of the things I emphasized was if they had left Kursk alone and merely had a sufficient force to stop a potential Russian incursion into the Sumy region, because Sumy is directly opposite. It shares a border with Kursk. That might have been better. I will never know. But in any case, that's the path that they were taken. Now, there haven't the last 2-3 days there haven't been that many movements in the Kursk region. That's why I don't have a map of it yet. Quite honestly, like if you look at from our last show, it's only barely changed. There have been some small increases by the Russians of one area where the Ukrainians took back a little bit of land, but basically the size of Kursk during its height, when it reaches apogee, is now half of what it was. But the Russians are not going to put that many forces there because I think it's clear now, after 2.5 months, that their focus is really to win all of Donetsk. I think that is what they want, and there have been several articles from American newspapers, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, that Pokrovsk, of course, is a very important town. It's not just a hub. There's another coal mine, the biggest one in Donetsk, which is just southwest of Pokrovsk. And in all these areas that have coal mines, they have terracons. They have these giant earth mounds from the mining, which give them a very important advantage to oversee. In fact, Syriac maps, they said this is actually what allows the Russians to oversee everything in the South Donetsk region around Ugledar. So they are very pivotal. Now, just let's go with the last two slides. The next slide is basically the Kupiansk front. And you can see where some of the gains have been made. Obviously, the Russians now are reaching the Oskil River, that salient, which was completely flat about, let's say, 6 weeks ago, has now really extended. And you can see what they're doing. The next slide shows basically what the intentions are. They want to cut off the Ukrainians. They want to bifurcate that place. Now, there has been some very heavy fighting for the Russians in the southern part, and I'll explain why. So these, the Oskil River, basically what we've learned in the Ukrainian war is that you want your drone operators. Incidentally, there was a very important drone operator in his unit that was killed yesterday, for the Ukrainians. So you want the drone operators not that close or that far from the front, right? Drones are the only thing right now that's able to slow down the Russians. In the Terny region, which is just south of the salient that we're looking at the moment, okay, it's not on the map, but it's just south of it. The Russians are pushing another salient towards the Zherebets River. Now, there's some areas where they already control the Zherebets River, but ultimately what the Russians want is to recapture Liman. Weeb Union had some stuff that he posted about this, I believe like a week ago. And essentially the Russians made a go for this area. Now, they did manage to get a toehold in the north of this salient, but the Ukrainians conquered back some of the southern part of the salient. Now, there's a video showing drones disabling and destroying about 12 Russian armored vehicles. And although there's talk of like mass casualty events, Weeb Union points out that in a lot of these videos, both the Russians and the Ukrainians claim like mass casualties, But the fact of the matter seems to be that there isn't really as many casualties as they think. Now, I saw a video of a Russian BMP moving along with 3 guys on top, and they're driving right straight toward a Ukrainian tank. I think they're under the impression that the Ukrainian tank has been abandoned, because you see this a lot. The Ukrainian tank fires, obviously, it stops the BMP. Obviously, the driver is dead, but the 3 guys on top survive. 2 of them run away in one direction. One of them runs around the tank. Now, I don't know what happens to them, but that's where the video ends. So, we'll never know. But I guess what I'm saying is even with that level of munition, that kind of firepower, it doesn't always transpire into like huge casualty events for either side. Of course, some people die in these close quarter fighting, especially with artillery and tanks, right? But so, anyways, that's just something to keep in mind. So, anyways, in the Toretsk region, which precedes Liman, the Russians are further away from the front line. I brought this up on the last show. So that means their drone operators, unless they have some of the new drones, unless they have some of the fiber optic drones there, they cannot work as closely. And so spots are 15, 20 kilometers away from the front, whereas for the Ukrainians, they're between 5 and 10 kilometers. And a lot of drones only go about 5, maybe 6 kilometers. Again, unless they have better drones. So this ultimately is what determines success or weakness. This part of Ukraine, its territory is quite flat. So the defender, especially if they're on the other side of the Oskil River or the Zherebets River, they're generally safe. They generally don't have to worry about anything. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration after I just said that one of the drone operator units and their officer were killed yesterday, but just keep that in mind. Anyways, so I would say that's about it for the front. There was an enormous attack on Odessa in the last 2 days, and so they're hitting more warehouses. They also hit another ship, and I didn't want to bring this up on the last show because I wasn't sure how many ships they have hit so far. Before we did the last show, there were 3 that the Russians either sank or damaged. Now, these are purportedly civilian ships, but of course the Russians don't trust them. And the news basically has been that that the Russians have been defeated in the Black Sea, that there's nothing to worry about. But the New York Times did have an article where they claimed 22 ships have been sunk or damaged by the Russians, which have increased logistics for the Ukrainians, but also confidence in basically in international finance and trade, because these ships have to be insured,
and that was a lot of the problems happening in the Red Sea right now, and a large reason of what's holding up trade right now in the Red Sea is that not necessarily the Houthis can easily sink these ships, even though they certainly can, but it is, of course, a process. It is, of course, something they have to dedicate a lot of resources to. It's a matter that nobody wants to take this risk when it comes to insuring these ships.
Yeah. Well, one of those ships, one of the Greek ships that was attacked not long ago, made it back to Greece, but when it got to Greece, it sank. So you have really crazy, unpredictable things like that can happen that are honestly, they're quite a big loss, right? Because these ships aren't cheap, and they're very necessary.
But is it just for trade purposes for Ukraine, or is it more of that?
Oh, no,
the Russians are getting intelligence that they're using civilian ships to ship arms and munitions and so forth.
Yeah, I would think
they were
so.
using ambulances, for instance. in the Donbass. Remember that? Remember like those
yes.
videos of like ambulances or like soldiers are pouring
That's
out of
right.
them?
Yes.
Yeah. Because then you could report in the New York Times the next day that the Russians targeted civilian ships or civilian ambulances. Yeah. So, that one. I think Russians
we
with
need
Attitude
to
posted.
show the most important frontline update.
Oh, that's so great.
So
no, but I was gonna ask.
But yes, go on.
But wait, do we interrupt the? Do we interrupt the minutia minute? Look, Donald Trump's hair strands, those supply lines, those are like track lines and.
Yeah. So. Yeah. So. Yeah. So that's it for the minutia minute. Especially when we have you on the show, I don't want to spend as much time on it, but I think like we covered all the big news on the front line so far. Okay?
I did just have one last point I wanted to make about Ukraine overall, which is an interesting factoid, I guess you could say, I came across the other day, and that is apparently the Department of Defense only had 4 analysts working on a potential war scenario between Russia and Ukraine in the lead up to the Russian intervention in the Donbass. Out of everyone in the Pentagon,
I don't know if that's believable or not.
not well. What they claim is, and you do bring a point that it's probably not the whole truth here, but let me just read exactly.
Well, I mean, there were people that think that like they were game planning this since the early '90s. But okay, go ahead, Constantine.
But this is just some statements from the commander of the 101st, so I'll just read these briefly because I think they speak for themselves. Some Army officers have argued that observations from the war, while useful, are not always relevant to the U.S. military, which expects to fight multi-service operations backed by highly trained soldiers funded by a military budget many times Ukraine's GDP. Quote, if you look at the fight that's going on in Ukraine, you've got a large Soviet army fighting a small Soviet army, right? That's a defense-oriented artillery, said the commander of the 101st Airborne, Major General Brett Sylvia, in an August interview. That's not our kind of fight, he said, contrasting the U.S. multi-domain maneuver-centric approach with the grinding trench warfare that has defined much of the war in Ukraine. So, even despite this, the largest industrial war since the end of World War II, we are looking at complete hubris from, of course, the Pentagon, a refusal to learn anything about this war that they've poured billions of their own dollars into. They're not taking any lessons from. They think that a 90s approach against Iraq is going to be what they can use against Russia, which is one of the things that they did towards the beginning of the war. They were surprised that the Russians didn't fold like the Iraqis and that they actually based a lot of their models for a potential war on the 91 Gulf War. But that's also on top of the RAND Corporation admitting that the U.S. simply does not have the hard power to outright enforce its will anymore, and that military production is down, quality of equipment in the military, of course, training, that the hard power the Americans once commanded, while not completely diminished, is a shell of what it was even just a decade ago.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that tank maneuver. That was an old tactic they learned in Afghanistan that I believe they carried through to in Chechnya, which is that you sit on top of the tanks because in case there's landmines. So if you get blown off, it's like a number of soldiers could still live. Whereas if like you're in the actual armed vehicle, then you're going to get cooked. But I was watching this old footage from Chechnya the other week. And there was a number of like reporters that went there even from the West. And I believe it was the first one around 96, but then the second one around 2000, 2001, you have an odd similarity in some ways, except it's not an insurgency, but the sort of like slow plotting, grinding, overtaking of cities. But of course, things were like much, much different in Chechnya. Like the Russian army was not nearly as equipped or sophisticated as it is now.
Yeah.
They were barely holding on to weapons, the ones that they didn't sell during the early 90s. So the ones they didn't sell to Africa or, other Eastern European nations. So you have like a very different picture of the Russian army. And I wonder what happened to those guys. A lot of those guys probably drank themselves to death. They're like, I mean, some of them probably fighting Ukraine right now. Like they're probably fighting for the Ukrainians. But it's very interesting. But to go to the minutiae of that one map, I think it was the second map. They're at the border, or have they overtaken Novo Ukraina or Ukrainka? Have they because that's about like a population of like 20,000 people?
No. Okay, so Selydove is 22,000. Novo Ukrainka is a much smaller settlement. It is well south of Selydove. It is just west of Ugledar.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay, but it's like east of Staromayorsk. It's like halfway between Zaporozhye proper and Ugledar, right? Now,
right.
Novoukrainsk is a town that the Russians have like a bit of a toehold in, but the Ukrainians mostly control. These are small towns. These are not like, I don't think they're more than 2,000-3,000 people at the most, to be honest. But Selydove was 22,000 people. Now the Russians also took Gornyak recently, and we were just talking about Novoukrainsk, but the Russians did take another town called Ukrainsk, which is north, which is more towards the Donetsk sort of city limits, kind of. It's more towards Pokrovsk, right? In that salient, when I say Pokrovsk, I don't mean it's like 2 kilometers from Pokrovsk, obviously, right? Yeah, the towns that they're capturing there, like, it varies on how damaged they are. Like, some are more, some are less. Now, Pushilin, which is like the guy who's in charge of the Donetsk region, he's visited some of the new towns, and like honestly, like where some of these towns have just recently been liberated, like I said, whose names I just said, and I honestly can't believe there are still people there. But yeah, Selydove is like the largest town that so far has fallen, let's say, within a week or two, right?
And at this rate, do you think they're going to go all the way for Zelenopol, like upwards, or?
I mean, if we go to the first map, you're going to see basically like where the bulges are, so to speak, where the Ukrainians are holding on from retreating, right? You obviously, like, there's that salient in the northern part, the northeastern part, that's the Pokrovsk front, and you see this huge pocket at the bottom, right? At the bottom is where the Ugledar front is, or was, right? The Russians are going to want to eventually level this off. However, there is a river there. There is a water barrier of some kind. I don't know if it's a natural lake or not, or if it's man-made. Now there's a town, I believe it's Korakovo, like that's the main defense force. You can see that near where this pocket is forming, this large pocket. And remember, the Russians took care of a larger pocket north of it, but there's still some in the south. And there is a line of defense that is there to stop a south to north expansion, right? So maybe what I'll do is I'll take like a screen cap of the area that I'm talking about, and then just circle it for you, and we can put it back into the chat. This is the pocket that I'm talking about. Okay, I'm gonna send it to you, Konstantin, right now.
No, but it seems that their tactic has been has it been more or less consistent, where from the north to the south they'll create a pocket where they can rely like on the troops in terms of like the backsplash on either side, and they'll essentially just encircle an area.
Yes.
And
they're always working, because I think the template was probably set with Bakhmut.
Yeah.
Everybody called the the road of death, right? That one road that led out of Bakhmut, from the west of Bakhmut, over to Chasiv Yar. And now more than half of Chasiv Yar has fallen to the Russians, but it was very hard for the Russians to take. And of course, the Russians lost a lot of territory in 2023 that they had gained on the outskirts as padding for Bakhmut, particularly in the southwestern quarter, the part that went to the canal that bifurcates Chasiv Yar, and is close to Ivanovskaya. So, but I would say that's the strategy now. Now they haven't always done, like, all the commanders in all the regions of the front, and this is like 1,000-kilometer front, right? Like, honestly, some of them were quite incompetent. The first two tries in Ugledar were very costly and embarrassing for the Russians, particularly in February of 2023. That was a head-on attack. It's something that should never have happened.
The narrative was they sort of just gave up on Ugledar. They sort of just like pieced out. But now it just.
But now it's taken, and they took it like almost a month ago now. I think about 3 weeks. So, yeah, I think that's what they learned. They learned, look, everything is about supply. Everything is about roads for replenishment, and that's how it's done. Of course, this is the easternmost section of the Ukrainian front line, right? Their main hubs are cities like Kharkov and Poltava and Zaporozhye and Dnepropetrovsk. Like, that's where those are their main hubs. They're far from the front line, but that also means that resupplying the front line becomes more and more difficult. And of course, the Russians have upped their game in drones. Like, when the war started, the Ukrainians were way ahead of the Russians in terms of drone warfare, drone surveillance, FPV drones, like way ahead. But the Russians, by 2023, they were already beginning to slowly catch up in the spring. And then by August, September of 2023, I kind of think they were on par. Their jamming systems are really what came through a lot of the times. Of course, there's many cases, again, as I said, that whole area of Kremenaya, Liman, that whole area, very difficult for the Russians. They still have to clear that forest in order to go any further. So that was a very well patrolled, defended front for the Ukrainians, as was Seversk, which is just southeast of it. But I just think that the Russians have learned so much. There's countless articles by the Washington Post, New York Times, not extolling, but foreign policy. What's the one? Bloomberg. Look, all the big publications talking about how the Russians have made ATACMS essentially ineffective. How they've made and really, like, a lot of the scores that the Ukrainians have now on the Russians when they attack, like, power stations and oil fields, what are they doing that with? Well, they're doing that with drones, right? So drones are a really big deal. And they are what's sort of saving a complete collapse of the front line. Actually, but you know what? Now that we're talking about this, just some bit of news, very weird, very concerning. So there was an officer pilot for one of the Tu-22s bomber aircraft that was killed by Ukrainian spies that had managed their way into Russia. They had figured out where he lived and killed him. So they're very, like, there are some of them that are just like complete fanatics, right? And this makes it interesting for, I think, where the war will go to and what are the factions that are deciding, because, like, the motivation for the Americans to keep the war going is different than the motivations for the Ukrainian nationalists, right? They're not the same. Remember that in The Economist in 2022, Zelensky was interviewed, and you could say from February to the first days of April, before Boris Johnson got there, Zelensky was interested in peace. And in that article that came out in late March for The Economist 2022, he said, I think some of our partners, I'm paraphrasing here, are interested in a long war rather than a quick peace because they're interested in, like, hurting or diminishing Russia, even at the demise of Ukraine. So when he said no to this, he obviously knew how potentially the war would go. He knew what their motivation was. Everybody's forgotten about that. And of course, he has to contend with nationalists who had killed part of his diplomatic team that began the early peace talks, the ones before Istanbul, that were taking place in Minsk, Belarus. So I'm sure he was afraid of them as well. And I don't think the Americans can fully control those guys. I don't think they can monitor them all the time.
No,
That's
after a
not
certain
possible.
point, they're off the leash,
No.
much like a lot
They're off the leash. They're
much
going to
like
do
a lot of
stuff
the Islamic
independently.
groups that they trained in places like Iraq and Syria, where they
Yeah.
will arm them, they will fund them. Then after a certain point, there's only so much they can do to control them.
Or even
No,
Chechnya,
don't kill
for
the
that
Kurds.
matter.
They're on our side. You don't see the bigger picture. Don't
Yeah,
call
even
them
the
Persian
Chechens, for that
hillbillies.
yeah. Oh my god.
They're your Sunni brothers.
That's so. Oh my god.
So I want to throw a lesbian.
They're not killing
communists.
each other. They're at least killing the Russians.
You don't understand what the bigger picture is. This could be like a great Tom Clancy, based movie, right?
I can't wait for the Call of Duty where it's like the Russians are trying to take over the world again, and they're gonna have to be like,
God.
they're gonna have
It's
to like come up with the most Ukrainian name, but like, he's like, okay, he's a far right nationalist, but they're gonna have to like censor the spinny wheels. Like they're not gonna.
Terror spending.
They can't like put those. They'll like mention Bandera in the game. It'll be funny.
Yeah.
Like,
Bandera had a trans woman girlfriend.
Yeah, they'll do something like that.
They'll have to do that, right? They have to do that.
Did you know that Derwinger was
West
actually
Falls.
Russian? yeah, it's like Derwinger was actually Russian. That's like they're gonna try to do like they're gonna do like a total. Well, they did that. Call of Duty actually did do that with the Muslims, where it's like Russia's evil, but like the Muslims are wholesome Chungus libtard Muslims.
Yeah,
They're like gay neoliberal Islam that's led by that woman Farah, whatever her stupid name is. Like they did this like whole like reverse history of the G1.
Yeah, the Highway of Death, the Gulf War I, they said that it was the Russians who had it.
Yeah, the Highway of Death was committed by Russia.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh man. But two more questions about the front.
Mm-hmm.
So the one map beyond there, you have like Rheinpol and Mizovka, but like that's like far ways away. That's like going into like further west.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, if you, I don't know, if people want a timeline, on like where is Russia going to be by the end of the year, I think there's a strong likelihood that the Russians are probably going to be in the town next to Pokrov, which is Mirnograd or Mirograd. I think that's entirely possible. They're very close. There was a bit of there was a chunk of land, a Terrakon, that they lost to the Ukrainians 2 days ago that they regained today. A lot of back and forth. Like, this is what I mean. I can't get into all of every single back and forth because you're really, really tiny bits of territory that the consequence isn't nothing, but it's not huge. I would say that if the rate of the way Selydove fell and the Ukrainians are not serious about pulling out of Kursk, then I don't know what to say. Like, if that keeps going on,
the next major city you'd think that like what's the most logical major battle? Like not backward level. Minograd, yeah.
Minograd. I would say the dark horse could be Kupiansk, and the reason I say Kupiansk is because about 3 weeks ago the Russians finally took over Sinkovka. A lot of back and forth. There were times where they controlled it and they lost it. Big losses too. You remember, Konstantin, in the winter we were covering that. Like,
yes,
they kept sending men, and like that. Those videos actually showed not just like machines being lost, but lots of men. Embarrassing, right? Yeah. Like it's sad. Like, who the hell was in? And then we found out that those poor guys were they were criminals. A lot of the guys in Kursk are also criminals, by the way. I don't know if people know that. That's why they're so expendable, right? So,
And it does explain a lot of
long
the
story
early
short,
behavior you did see in the Kursk offensive as well.
yes. Now, the Russians over 2 weeks ago got a hold south of Sinkovka immediately, like very close, just a few kilometers from border city limits to Kupiansk. They got a hold of a place called Petropavlovsk. There was a major battle that took place back there in 2022 during the Ukrainian Kharkov offensive that was successful. The Russians are in that town now, Petropavlovsk, and they still haven't been kicked out. And you see that I showed you that salient at the bottom, big, like the one like the one in Pokrovsk. You can see it has a lot of girth now. It's no longer skinny, it's expanding. They're going to want to create a pocket. And that toehold in the north, just adjacent to Kupiansk, that's a possibility, right? But Kupiansk is a very well defended area for the Ukrainians. If they lose that, then I would say they're in deep trouble, because once they do that, the Russians will then move all the way south and just capture everything both on the east and west side of the Oskil River, right? That gives them a leeway into not only Liman, but Izium. The thing with losing Pokrovsk for them, for the Ukrainians, is it will allow them to have like a blooming flower effect, where there are not going to be that many defenses west of Pokrovsk. Biggest coal mine in the eastern part of the country is there. So there's revenue to think about, right? But the other thing is that there are no less than 6 highways and railroad tracks that intersect it and radiate outward. It is a hub, and the Ukrainians cannot afford to lose it. But my guess is that I don't know, only because everything I've been watching since August the 8th has been that the Ukrainians are willing to sacrifice Donetsk to keep Kursk and to maybe keep more of the north, like Kharkov and Kupiansk. I don't know what the logic behind that is. I don't know if it's a question of logistics. Logistics would play a part of it. Remember that Kupiansk is not that far from Kharkov. Kharkov is a big city, 1.1 million before the war, but it's very wide. It's a city that its spatial occupation of the land is like a city that's in population much higher.
Very sprawled
right?
out.
So yeah, it's sprawled. That's the word I was looking for.
Izium, if they do take Izium, that would present major logistical problems for
Yes.
Ukraine.
Yes, because that was also a hub.
Well, and that
with direct lines into Russia.
Yeah.
This is why, like, Russia losing that in 2022 was like so terrible.
That was bad,
if they had more men, I mean, now they don't have to do another mobilization. Remember, that's something everybody was talking about. But there are literally so many men volunteering to go fight now that they don't have to do another mobilization, which is vastly different than what you see happening in Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine introduced a law now that can throw you in jail for filming their TCC goons, basically.
Oh, it's escalated to riots
rounding up
the
men.
TCC. And they've been in Kiev, they've been in Odessa, they've been in all the places that you would not have expected them. More and more Western Ukrainian names are coming up.
Lvov and Vinnytsia, yes. Like Western Ukrainian cities. Like, these are like, they're pulling guys off the street that like think like Russian-speaking Ukrainians should be dying for Ukraine, not them. They're like, what are you doing? You're pulling me off the street. I'm too good for this.
I mean, I know we've covered it before, but there's cases where they're just outright torching the TCC vans in places like Odessa.
Yeah, that happened today as well. I shouldn't be so critical
callous.
And so mean and callous. Like, a lot of these guys, honestly, like, yeah, they're patriotic, but they're also, they're not young. They're past their fighting age. Really, they know that they would be just thrown in there. And there was the statistic that came out that Most Ukrainian guys that are trained for a month to 5 weeks die within the first 10 days.
Oh God.
Can you imagine in the
Holy
first 10
crap.
days? Like that is
That's
like
literal meat grinder action right there. Like that's
that's
terrible.
meat grinder. Yeah, like
Yeah.
and the reason this is happening, right, is because of Russia's aerial superiority. That's really what is pushing them back. Is that when things get really tough, the Russians send in the bombers, the Ukrainians don't have anything to stop it, and ultimately they have to move back.
That's kind of like the Americans in Afghanistan. Like, if things got really hairy, they'll just send in Apache longbows, and that's it. Like, it's, they can't, like, at most, I mean, well, I shouldn't say that, because they say that a lot of American aircrafts are actually very unequipped to handle surface-to-air missiles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, the AC-130, it could very easily get shot down in an engagement with a power that has surface-to-air capability.
Yes.
There was that one, I think, like 17 airmen died in like one crash. This was like in Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In an AC-130. Yeah. But no,
that's crazy. Those are one of those flying fortresses, but they shoot down instead of across or just bomb.
Yeah.
They have like a little mini cannon inside and very powerful machine guns.
They're very good for special forces operations because they have very like sophisticated equipment that can basically surgically strike certain areas that are like for danger close. I learned all of this from Call of Duty, by the way. But it's funny.
Someone did their homework.
Only a Soylenio who was playing Call of Duty in high school would know this. But so, for example, in the Kursk region, there's a stalemate more or less, but I guess for people that don't know, a stalemate still translates into soldiers dying every single day. So is there still like active fighting in Kursk, or is there?
Oh yeah, there is.
Yeah. But I wanted to read you actually something that my good friend Big Sergey wrote.
Oh, please do.
In the
Big Serge.
Yeah, Big Serge. Maybe I could get him on show. But he wrote this on his stack, and he said that right now, I think he wrote this a few months ago, and right now Ukrainian media is reverberating what he's saying. So here he's saying about Kursk, unlike Ryabotino, however, there is not even a strong theoretical case to be made for incurring heavy losses on the axis of advance. Even a generous sketch of the coming weeks leaves Ukraine at an impasse in Kursk. Suppose they push through to the same, how do you say that, Saim or Saim? And force the river. Yeah.
Yep.
Suppose
they got pushed out of there, by the way.
I think that was one of the first places they got pushed out of.
Yes, that happened about 2 weeks ago. The Russians pushed them out of there, but if the Russians didn't, it could have encircled them.
Yeah. Suppose they push through the same and force the Russians to abandon the southern bank, capturing Konovo, and carve out 120 kilometers front in Kursk. What then? Is it a fair trade for the Toretsk, New York agglomeration, or Pokrovsk, where the Russians continue to steadily advance? Kripost thus threatens to turn into another Volchansk or Krinky, an isolated attrition pit disconnected from the crucial axis of the war. Control over the Sutsa does not exert any leverage over Russia's ability to sustain the fight in the Donbass or around Kharkov, but it does create another vacuum that will suck in precious Ukrainian resources, banging away on a road to nowhere. If you had suggested a month ago that the Russians could contrive a way to draw off and pin the maneuver elements of no less than 5 Ukrainian mechanized brigades along the variety of disparate support elements, this would have been viewed as a beneficial move for them. Yet this is precisely what the AFU has voluntarily, and of course he highlights that in black, voluntarily done with Kursk. Now we have, that guy's one of the worst. He's one of the worst, folks. Weislaw G. lawyer, you know that guy, LOAC lawyer.
I think I know who you mean.
Yeah, Krinky, but Krinky 2.0, but exponentially larger. AFU has imposed a strategic dilemma on themselves. Withdraw now would mean admitting failure and start calm disaster. Keep the foothold will further deplete the AFU operations at a scale that the AFU can't withstand. Then he says, brilliant, quote unquote, move indeed. instead of forcing Russia to commit their operational reserves, degrading own defense capabilities in the Donbass and Luhansk direction. The Russians are exploiting this advantage as we speak, capturing key terrain in Donetsk and Luhansk while gradually pushing forward. And this is a pro-Ukrainian shill account that is actually admitting this. So that's that's a big.
Well,
yeah.
On the last
any,
show,
retard could have seen that coming. I mean,
I know they didn't want to admit it right away, which is sort of always the case, right? Because there's so much hope. But on the last show that Konstantin and I did, there was an exchange not only of 95 for 95 prisoners, but there was an exchange of dead in the Kursk region.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
501 Ukrainian soldiers versus 89 Russian.
Yeah,
I mean that's crazy.
But speaking of the prisoners, though, like we always hear like the Russians, especially since Prigozhin, may he rest in peace. Prigozhin like emptying out Russian prisons, and of course they have the rule that if like you're a murderer or a rapist, that they're not like going totally Oscar Derwinger. But have the Ukrainians emptied out their prisons to send them to the front yet?
Yeah, that's happened.
Okay. Yeah, but you don't hear about it, of course.
You don't. And actually, within the first 2 weeks of the war, or 3 weeks of the war, sometime in March, Zelensky gave the go-ahead. I don't know if it was formalized, but he gave the go-ahead that prisoners should be sent to the front. Everyone should get. Remember, in the early days, everyone should get a weapon, including prisoners. Now, do you remember that?
Do you remember? Like,
and then there were gangs in Kiev that started robbing people. Like,
they had webcams. They had like those Earth cams. Like, remember, like you still can get them like hacked into webcams, and you'd see like people would like zone in on the Ukrainian ones, like the ones around Kiev, and you'd have like gangs like robbing banks and like
crazy shit.
Drug dealers pulling over each other. Yeah, like crazy stuff. Like
at least they had those anti-air pickle jars.
I
have a theory that was to entice like those like old boomer conservatard like Tea Party people, because they're like, see, they're just like American libertarians. They have guns. We're gonna give them all guns. It's like real like Thomas Jefferson yeoman farmer that also defends himself against the government. Like, I think that was like a propaganda move to get like the normie cons invested. Like, I don't know. I'm just talking about my ass, but there was probably like one State Department chill that thought that up and like, well, see, the conservatards are gonna eat this up because they're all like Thomas Jefferson. It's Jeffersonian. They all have their own guns. They're defending their land.
They're just like you. This Gupnik has his own vodka that he makes in the woods.
Instead of corn mashed potatoes.
You see him there in the bushes. Okay, don't feel him now. He's wearing his black Adidas pants, right? with the stripes. We must be careful here.
The 90s never really ended in Ukraine, did they?
Oh, man. It's like the Russians, they were using the weather technology after Chernobyl. They were like, to spare Moscow. I saw a news report that they were like...
That's so ridiculous.
They were like to spare Moscow, they like used weather manipulation to make sure that only the Ukrainians got like irradiated rain. Like, I remember there was like some like YouTube video with like 1 million views talking about that. Like,
I literally don't believe that. I mean, come on. Remember when the Russians still controlled Chernobyl?
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians were threatening to like blow it up. I remember that in the early months of the war. And but there were people who were already showing the winds would blow it towards Belarus and Poland. And the Poles were like, no, you're not gonna effing do that.
They're gonna blow up the huge dome that costs billions of dollars to make. They're gonna like blow it up so like the elephant's foot could have its final revenge on the Slavs. Like that's it's so surreal how that miniseries came out like right before the clown vid and then the Ukrainian war. It's very almost like prophetic in a certain way. Like there was like a few months where people were like obsessed about Chernobyl, and yeah, it was strange times. But
Well, we're
yeah,
bringing
so
up
they're like,
all the things that Ukraine did towards the beginning of the war, and because you brought up
yeah,
the Poles, it reminds me of when Ukraine sent the contaminated grain shipments to Poland, Slovakia, and Romania.
or the contaminated meat, the meat train. Remember the
Yes,
meat train?
yes, I do.
Yeah. My
And
old man even remembers the meat train back in the
I
day.
totally forgot.
They had like it was like forever. Like they took months and months, like no port from like Poland to Belarus. Like none of them wanted it. So they're just like, I think they buried the carts full of like the irradiated meat. But it's very funny because the miners that built, it turns out that it actually wasn't going to happen, where they thought that the water table was going to be polluted forever. The miners actually came from those coal mines in the Donbass. But I guess like the descendants of those miners, I guess they're evil fascist Novorossiya Russian shills now. So I guess like nobody, yeah, they're like, they were like, for a time I remember they were trying to say like they were like Ukrainian miners, and they tried to like say that it wasn't from the Donbass, but it was from the like this very weird like anti-Russian propaganda. Like the average like Westernoid doesn't like really have a grasp on the history of Russia, so it's very funny when they like do these like weird retconnings of even like recent history. So it's like, yeah, you know.
Yeah, they have to twist themselves
Anyways,
not to differentiate between Russians and Ukrainians when you could tell the average Westerner one's one, one's the other, and they'd believe you.
yeah, yeah, it's fair. But but before we move on about the front line, I remember there was a theory by a friend of mine who has unfortunately passed away, that was actually murdered in Ukraine. He thought, you know who I'm talking about. Coach Kino. I remember, yeah, I remember he thought that when it comes to Nikolaev, that it would make, like, say if the Russians, and I was thinking about this recently because I think it was it on Caribbean Rhythms? I think it was on, it was on BAP's show, Russians with Attitude, went on BAP's show again. And I think it was Kirill that said that essentially the sort of like mood in Russia is that if they don't take Odessa, that it would be a huge piss off, in other words. But I remember Coach Kino saying, this was like 2 years ago almost, before he was murdered by the SBU. He said that it was more logical for them to grind out by taking Nikolaev, because the ports in Odessa, they have these Western given Harpoon missiles, and the Russians simply don't want to like really risk going through, like going into sort of like a water invasion. That's like way too risky. And I wonder, like, I never got a chance to ask you guys, I wonder if that's like a logical step. Like, would they have to take Nikolaev and then like sort of hop, skip, and a jump over to Odessa if their objective is to take Odessa? Like if they can just do it through the sea, and those Harpoon missiles actually don't pose that much of a threat.
Well, I mean, some people think that Odessa, that the Russians don't want to destroy Odessa.
Yeah.
And that they would like to get it. I don't know if everybody in Putin's administration agrees with that, and it might piss off the public, but I don't know if there's really any plans to take Odessa, to be totally honest. Like the kind of optimism that there was in 2022.
Yeah.
Primarily because the Russians took Kherson and Zaporozhye, which kind of like doubled the amount of territory that they held prior to the start of the war. I think people felt like, but what we saw by November 2022 was that the Russians never had enough forces to even think about doing that.
Yeah.
And the Ukrainians were very busy conscripting and getting as many volunteers as possible, training in the West, to keep pressure in the East and the Donbass region. So, I think like, I mean, that would be very costly. I don't think that, I've always been skeptical about the Russians going in for Odessa. Maybe I was less skeptical in 22 like everybody else, but I remember that Dima from, from military
Dima from the military summary channel.
Summary channel. Remember he was talking about this massive helicopter invasion, and like he was I'm going, oh my god.
It was gonna be like
I
Red
believe it.
Dawn, like the
Yeah.
helicopters. Yeah.
Now he's gotten way better at this. Everybody got better. Everybody got better. We've got better. Like everybody, all those mapper channels honestly got better.
Yeah, like Weeb Union.
Yeah, Weeb Union, yeah. All of them, History Legend, they all got better at predicting these things. You know, part of it was sorry, my mic came out. You don't know if 175,000 men is really enough to do that. Now, maybe
for a city like Odessa, no, you would need
and then you would still have Kiev, you would still have Zaporozhye. You know, this is just that's not enough men. This is a big, this is a huge country. It's like, you know, it's like at least a third of the size of the U.S.
Yes,
like
it's the largest in continental Europe, excluding Russia.
Yeah, like it's way bigger than France. Like, are you crazy? You know, History Legends, I didn't get to see it, but I saw a short clip. He talked about the amount of casualties the Americans had, just the Americans, okay? In all the various fronts from like 44 to 45, okay? So everybody knows they had 135,000 dead, missing, or injured just for the Normandy area, okay? But Sicily was 80,000. Some of the other places in Italy were 80,000. Some of the Battle of the Bulge was 80,000. Like, these are like just American losses are either equal or dwarfed to what is happening.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like, those are just American losses. We're not even talking about, you know,
your German losses.
German, British,
Italian.
You know, some Canadians, Italian. Like, we're talking about still larger numbers here, right? I mean, we still don't know what the losses are in the Ukrainian war. We would assume at least 200,000 dead if you compiled both sides.
Oh, of course.
Oh yeah.
Right. After 3 years of war, but
right,
like I just give you examples of at least that much just for one army for 1 year, not almost 3 years.
Well, I did want to return to the point about Odessa because you brought it up, and looking at a lot of the rhetoric coming out of Russia now, what they say, what Putin says, what Lavrov says, what even Zakharova says, all of these people are going to keep it intentionally vague. They're not going to, of course, reveal their hand all at once. But the attitude I get in general by looking at all their statements, reading whatever comes across, is that they expect when they finally force the Ukrainians into negotiations that this neutral rump state, assuming they just take the 4 annexed oblasts and they get recognition of Crimea and they call it good for territorial claims on that, they expect to, of course, have their business and commercial interests restored by a neutral Ukraine, which would, of course, include the ports in Odessa as well. Now, I could just be speaking too soon. They might have some plan that we're not privy to for obvious reasons because they don't want to even give a hint of maybe a huge Odessa offensive. I doubt it, but just to make the argument for it. But it does seem like a lot of what they're banking on is the restoration of their business, commercial, and diplomatic ties with a Ukraine that they have some sort of guarantee, whether by the West or by whoever, that this country will not join NATO and that will not pursue further Westernization. And I think that's probably what they're banking on at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think they look at leaving Odessa to Ukraine as a bargaining chip. Yeah. Now, at the moment, they control the economic well-being of Odessa without being in Odessa. That's why I brought up, 22 ships sunk in just like about 2 months, right?
Well, theoretically, they could sink any ship in the Black Sea.
Now, it worries the Europeans because of course, Odessa, that region of Odessa, not just the city, of course, is the mouth of the Danube, right? that kind of terrifies the Europeans, and it may be why the Americans claim that they're, what is it, Constantine, the 101st Airborne?
Yeah, the 101st. They were the ones who did
They're in
the
Romania,
exercises. Yeah, in Romania, when it looked like a Nikolaev offensive was going to happen in fall of 2022, and that's when you got the original Dirty Bomb story.
Yeah, I've seen some of those soldiers. That they must have a battalion called the Taco Battalion. It's not it's not what it used to be.
Land. Yeah, I remember Defend the Burger Land. I remember
Yes.
Ramirez.
One of the best tweets I've ever seen in my life comes from if you remember Trash World Citizen. He actually came on my show before he left. He had that tweet about like in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 when they said defend Burgerland. That's like the most realistic depiction of war in America ever.
Is that Trash Wave? Is that him?
Trash Wave, yeah.
Oh my God, I love him so much.
Yeah,
he's hilarious.
He
DM'd me. You know, I don't know if I'm getting him or DJ Audit the Fed, but he once DM'd me, and he goes, bro, I'm Slavic too. I'm Czech. I kid you not. He just like I idolized him. Like, you know, when there was that woman that tweeted, you know, I wouldn't date you if you were the last man on earth. I would sooner date my dog. And you know, you remember Beardson and Sean Prince Hubris, what a ridiculous name. I fucking love that. Him and I are mutuals on Instagram. Anyways, long story short. So you know, all the guys started spelling out YHITEFU. You know, I'm not gonna finish it. And then you remember that? Do you remember that? In 2018, I was in Moscow. I was hanging out with Colton. He came over from Minsk, and we were just like, oh my God, we saw that. I remember one night we were drinking beers, and it was hilarious. I could not believe what I was saying.
Post the old head Giga Chat right
He
now
set it to
chat.
music. He set the whole thing to music. It was.
I think I remember that. I think it was Biggie Slonk that set that one to music, if I recall.
Maybe.
It was like, so he made an edit out of that. Yeah.
It was this very dramatic music, as if like you couldn't guess what next letter was going to pop up. Like, ooh, the suspense.
Oh my God, that was great. But yeah, so what were we talking about? Yeah, I think that what did the Americans think was going to happen when they sent the 101st Airborne? That's a specific unit designed to like hold an area before a larger force can get there. Like, did they think that if they were going to, that if like Russia was going to enter Nikolaev, that like all of a sudden all of like the NATO treaties are like null and void, and it's like we have to defend Ukraine no matter what? Like,
well, I don't think they would have done anything if like Russia got very close to Nikolaev. They were on its outskirts. And for a short time, they blocked one of its roads. I think the way I see it is this. I could be totally wrong, but maybe some of the Americans misunderstood the strength of the Ukrainians, or maybe they didn't. And what they thought was, look, we're going to make, like, this is a great PR. We're going to make it look like we intimidated the Russians from taking Odessa. Yeah. Because what we found out at the end of 2022, October, November, was that Russia never even had enough forces to control at least 1/3 of the front line that they controlled, or like, let's say 25% of the front line that they controlled there, right? And so the likelihood of them like amphibious landing in Odessa, like with what? Like they would have had to remove more men from the Kursk region, in the Kharkov region, in order to do that. And I just think it was a PR move. Yeah. It has more to do with impressing upon Sandu, you know, the president of Moldova, that you know, it's time to join NATO. It's time to be part of the EU. Like that's what I think that was more about.
Yeah.
And that Odessa was a neat kind of foil to think it wasn't about that. Because, of course, there were the Moldovan elections. We'll get into that. But
oh, yeah. Has the pro-Western party won? Did they win? Or
Well,
they won by a very narrow margin. Now, I'll give you some, so some people thought that, look, the diaspora tends to vote very liberal.
Oh, yeah.
Armenia, Georgia are prime examples. And
I have plenty to say about Georgia.
Oh, the Armenians are the worst. That's like Serge Tankian was best friends with the fucking Pashinyan, and he's like, Donald Trump's a fascist. Like, that's insane. Like, I don't know. I've never. Well, at least their drummer is a secret Trump supporter. That's good. But
so
Serge Tankian's a libtard.
So a lot of people felt like, the same thing happened here, and I won't mention names, but there was one YouTuber who's part of a duo, and he said, I was always going to go like this. Nothing to see here. It's always those diaspora guys that never have to live in the country that wanted to be more liberalized, blah, 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 right?
Oh, yeah.
Except when you start peeling back the layers, that's probably not what happened. And hats off to George Sumayeli, the guy who's part of the gaggle, okay? So he broke this down very well by using an article from Politico. So the vast majority of the Moldovan diaspora lives in Russia. 38%. Okay, that's like over 1 million live there, right? Then next highest is like Germany, Italy, America. Italy had 60 voting stations. Russia had two. And only 5,000 votes for each one. There's no way. I mean, the race was down to like 2% or 1.5%. And there's a runoff. They're going to have to do another election and whatnot. And of course, they immediately began accusing the Russians of interfering, when in fact it was Sandu that made sure that they would completely inconvenience voters in Russia. Like, it's not, how do you compare 60 to a country that's less than half the size of Russia in Italy to 2 stations in Russia?
That sounds like fortifying right there.
That's major fortifying, right? So, I mean, they will press on until they get the results that they want. They will never stop until they get, the democratic will is shown, blah, blah, blah. It'll just be more propaganda, because the Americans want to be as close to Ukraine as possible.
With this referendum, it was, in a way, non-binding, because it was about interest.
It is non-binding, that's true.
In EU membership, but it's ultimately up to Brussels and the constituent states of the European Union in order to actually integrate a country like Moldova. So, while, yes, it is something, I agree with everything you said, that there was fortification, that the diaspora votes were not all treated equally.
40% of all diaspora votes were in Russia.
Yes. And
if they're all liberal, then they would have, why not open up more voting booths? Why 2?
Yes, I completely agree. And with that, I do, just to repeat, it is non-binding, and that this doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get into the European Union, but they are trying to force things in a certain direction. They are trying to, in a way, bolster Sandu's popularity, because this was a way, in opinion poll, on Sandu's leadership, which... and you also look at the earlier results, and maybe it was just the way they counted the votes and which votes came in first. It was like 60-40 anti-EU. And then it started slowly creeping back up. For a while there, it looked like it was going to be, I don't know, like 52-48. And then all the diaspora votes from the West came in, and it was evened out to be, about 50-50, which does mean that it is too close to call it. They probably will have to do a runoff. They probably will have to put this up to the electorate again, but we've seen this with the EU before. They did it in Ireland, they did it in Portugal, they did it all over when it came to forcing the referenda through, forcing quote-unquote democratic decisions through until they get the result that they wanted. And we're actually now seeing a similar situation in Georgia, slightly on the opposite end, where Georgian Dream, which is in control of the parliament and the seat of the prime minister, they won a 52% majority despite the fact that they had a grand coalition in order to defeat Georgian Dream. And now you have Salom Zurabishvili wanting to overturn the results, saying that it was Russian interference and that Georgia's democratic will was overturned and that nothing can stop our path to Europe. So,
Holy shit.
I love how they call it Russian interference. Like, van der Leyen came to Moldova in the summer and said, you're going to get big, like she literally said, big loans, big money if you vote for the EU. She literally said that with Sandu next to her on the podium. That was broadcast in Moldova. Like, she's literally bribing these people, but they're talking about Russian interference because some fucking Telegram channel. Give me a break.
Yeah, I think it was probably like it was. It's very funny how like a lot of these places in Eastern Europe, when Russia was basically being destroyed from the inside in the 90s, like all these places, I think like even in Moldova, they've like still maintained their corrupt oligarchs that have basically pillaged and looted the country into nothing. But yet it's like the Russians' fault now for not like doing enough. So it's like I don't know, it's a very weird narrative to sell like the Russian interference thing. I mean, Georgia, they do have like the sort of like mythos about the fall of the Soviet Union, how they were like at the tip of the spear. They were the first country to rebel. And like, that's a very big, source of pride. But even like Georgia has like in recent months tapered off into their like Russophobia, normie sadism against Russia. I guess they know that yeah.
Well, I mean, in a way, they're okay. Yeah, there's always going to be that faction, but
of course.
they've passed a law on LGBTQ propaganda, which is not a coincidence. Sounds a lot like the Russian laws that have been recently passed with similar titles.
Of course, the anti-NGO bills as well.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to say this. The West has lost Georgia. They lost it. It's like they can rant and rave all they want. I don't think they have it. Like, I was expecting this weekend, like I expected Georgian Dream to win. They won. Maybe they didn't win with the kind of margin I would have liked, but they won better than Sandu won. And you know what? The opposition wasn't there. Now, never say never. Maybe something will happen. But I was expecting big riots to take place. And it just seems like a lot of things have fizzled out. And even Constantine, what's her name? The president of Georgia. She was interviewed.
Zurabishvili.
Yeah, something like that. And she said she was afraid of being arrested. Like, whatever. Then don't go back. Like, I don't know.
She's like Gretchen Whitmer.
Yes, she
also is a French national
by spooks. Yeah.
These anti-LGBTQ thugs signing up.
Thugs. They love the word thug in that context, at least.
They said my lipstick was gaudy.
Oh man.
But with that, I suppose we could move on before we get into some Middle East stuff, and then we can cover out with the fun stuff like Trump and other nonsense related to clown show politics. Is Gio, you brought this up earlier. Whatever talking head it was saying that European security cannot hinge on Wisconsin voters.
There was a French politician that said that I mean, which is okay. If you were to say like in a neutral sense, it is true, and it's definitely something that Trump has been preaching, that Europe should more or less be in charge of its own destiny in terms of its security. But there was this French politician that went on the media. I think it was either French media or it may have been the BBC, saying that
it was French media. And it was
French media.
France's Europe minister. I'm trying to look for his name right now, but I do.
It was on Viscard, the stupid French propaganda channel. Visegrad, whatever it's called. He was saying that, we can't, quote unquote, let the voters in Wisconsin through the American election determine the future of Europe's security. Which is a very cosmopolitan libtard polemic where it's like these evil hick chud Trump voters are going to vote for non-intervention, and they're a bunch of vatniks that are being funded by Russia. They're consciousness has been immersed in Russian disinformation. That's why they're voting for
Barreau
Trump.
Is his name, if you must know.
Yeah, there you go. He's like a Norwooded Frenchman.
Typical bureaucrat. This guy would...
Yeah.
You can't tell him from anyone in Brussels. And it does bring me back to a point I've made a lot. And once again, I think anyone who's listened to the show for a long enough time would know that I am a huge advocate of Europe determining its own destiny and American foreign policy just leaving the continent and letting them take their natural course, in which case I would think would be some sort of reconciliation with the Russians and maybe working towards a peace in that framework. Something like maybe what de Gaulle would have imagined, just very grossly simplified. And that's something I think I've tried, at least tried to advocate a long time through the show. But when you listen to people like him, it always is the same back and forth. We can't let Wisconsin determine our destiny when they're talking about the potential of another Trump presidency. But when Biden came into office in 2021, they were the first one to kiss his feet, talk about the adults being back up in the room, and then what happens? What's one of the first major things in Europe that happens when Biden gets back in office? A multi-billion-dollar energy infrastructure project is blown up by him, by his people, probably on his orders. He directly threatened it. Trump cannot throw starbursts at Merkel without the entirety of Europe's elite going into a tailspin, but Joe Biden can blow up a multi-billion-dollar pipeline, practically a lifeline for European industry, as we've seen in the past 2 years, and that's the adults in charge. That's a friendly transatlantic relationship. All these people, they want to sit here and hand-wring about Trump, who, you look at his actual policy, it's move troops to Poland. It's move operations eastward. I guess that would mean less money for the Western Europeans, so I guess that's why they might be mad about it. But they want to treat him like he's some sort of radical isolationist that I kind of wish he was, frankly.
Yeah, I wish.
But they will kiss the feet of transatlanticism itself. They will worship the ideology of all of Europe being controlled by Washington through a few bureaucrats in Brussels, and that the future has no other determination. And I'll tell you what strategic autonomy means. I know Macron loved it. I know a lot of French politicians love it. It's empty threats backed by the Atlanticist relationship that you're only going to superficially break.
What do you mean?
Strategic independence is basically being a bratty bottom from Macron's perspective. That's what it is.
Bratty bottom.
This is why we bring you on the show. You put it in ways I could never even dream of.
No, it's so true, because all these nations, they have this weird schizo-mediaized relationship where, okay, so Macron's the best example. Because you have all these celebritards and whoever that, they have vacation homes in France and they really love him because Macron represents the sort of faux sophistication of the neoliberal, or what I like to call the transnational progressive world order, which is the old early 2000s paleoconservative term. But it represents a sort of terminal phase of okay, the managerial state will have this era of sophistication and it will have this appeal to libtard sentimentalities, but it'll also have this strangely masculine foreign policy when it comes to basically mostly Russia and the Middle East. But when it comes down to it, that pretense is essentially still dependent on these nations being at the beck and call of Washington. But because, and this is why I say bratty bottom, because Macron is doing this thing where it's no, we still have self-determination and we still have this sense of America's this boorish, they've abandoned their bourgeois values for something much more chud-like and boorish. And so therefore we're going to have quote unquote strategic independence. That's essentially just trying to wiggle their way out in a weird, playful manner that's actually going to just embolden the cock of America to fuck them even harder. That's I totally vulgar. I'm so sorry, but it's this weird game. It's this, it's this power bottom dynamic where it's, they're begging for it, but they're not. They're resisting, but the resistance itself is a form. This is very, ironically enough, this is very French post-structuralist. I remember Deleuze would use all these colorful metaphors like a field of anuses, right? Or when Sartre wrote about Jean Genet, the prisoner that got raped in prison, the poet that got raped in prison. But it's very, so the French are used to these sodomitic metaphors. But the point being is that their resistance only reinforces the rulership of the State Department in Washington. So it becomes this weird role-playing defiance of Washington, but that usually gets externalized into the heartland American chuds. That's the picture of America that they really hate.
Once again, they're pissed off at the Americans for not being liberal enough. That's all it comes back down to.
Exactly. So, but what's so funny about this guy is that isn't Wisconsin been a thoroughly blue state because they were the first unionist state?
I mean, they don't know, right?
They don't know. Yeah, they don't know.
If the Americans really want to fool the French, they could start producing commercials where, it'll feature American farmers, real down home types with baseball caps, but breakfast is a cup of tea or coffee with pate, just feature enough of them eating pate and brie, right? And let's say, oh, they've changed. No, but in all seriousness, right? I think I know what Macron, the narrative that Macron is using is in a way trying to resurrect or not resurrect. He's not really doing that. What he's trying to do is tap into an idea of France in Europe prior to World War II. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look at Europe, I say this because the springboard for me saying this, in fact, it's one of the reasons why I wanted you to come back on the show way back in I think September. Okay, is this, I saw a tweet by a Jewish guy who was saying that for the Jewish people, the 12 tribes, they amalgamated, they created something, well, except 10 of them were lost. But in any case, they amalgamated, they created something, it was unified. But in Europe, that never happened. I think there is a truth to that, right? And so what you have with Europe is that, the one kind of Christendom was never enough to unify. There was one Christendom, and then that was divided into two, then into three, then into myriads, right? And then you have the rise of nationalism, which further eroded something that maybe in Europe could have happened the way, let's say, it happened in India or China or on a micro scale, for the Jews.
Mm.
So when Macron is talking about independence, right, he's saying we have a way to do that. He's not explicit about it, but I'm sure the people who are listening to it are thinking, yeah, we'll go back and we won't war against each other again. Or we'll be dominant enough that we won't have to, right? A lot of the reasons why some of the Eurocrats will do anything for America to be in there is because this erosion, this lost chance for a true Christendom of Europe, right, that could span from Lisbon to Lugansk, let's say.
But one of the weird secularized version of it, yeah.
No. I mean a religious one, right? Because that's the religious part that breaks down first, right? So that doesn't happen. That cohesion doesn't happen, and what you have is, the Pope interceding from time to time, and then the Pope's importance diminishes, and then you have the rise of nationalism. I guess what I'm saying is the Eurocrats want America in Europe because they don't trust themselves anymore. They, in a sense, it seems they do not have a vision of Europe that would not fall back to World War II, I think, can be explained in a different way that's not like World War One. World War One is really the template, right? Because
the dissolution of empires.
Yeah, dissolution of empires, dissolution of aristocracy, the dissolution of religion, right? And like there was nationalism, you could, in a way, Napoleon is the supreme example of this, right? But in a way, like for whatever reason, these bureaucrats, maybe it's because of their American education, maybe it's something else, but they're acting in a way that they're saying that left to our own devices, we could probably not be safe from one another. And that America is a kind of necessary evil that has to be there so that we don't fall into that. That's a theory, okay? That's just a theory based on my idea of a kind of the disintegration of Christendom and the consequences that it's had for Europe. And so Macron is very cleverly using some of these points that recall that, because I think, like, if you're born in North America, you might not understand it. You might not understand this feeling, right? Although I didn't live a very long part of my life in Europe, like I was born there and I did live most of my childhood there. So, but that's still not as much as like somebody who might have emigrated to Canada or America when they were 24. I like to think, I feel like I can tap into some of this, right? Again, I think in many ways nationalism for Europe was not always a good thing. But it is a place that historically, like, individualism is kind of baked in. It really is. A lot of those polities that were inside the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you recall those stories from World War One where they have a speaker speaking in Slovak, another one in Croatian, another one in, I don't know, Czech, like, you know what I mean? Like, or Ukrainian/Ruthenian, like Romanian, like, it was sort of like the beginning of the end there, but it could have congealed at one point if I suppose if religion was more dominant than cultural ethnic identity, right?
I think that gets into a lot of the points that we've made on the show about petty nationalism, particularly surrounding the issues in Ukraine, where it is this thing that becomes all-encompassing and all-consuming at the expense of every other interest, that we would rather be puppets of the American Empire than have to make peace with people who, perhaps this is quite reductionist to me to say, but just to make the point here, but people who are very similar to us ethnically and even religiously at that point. And that when those, I don't want to call them minor differences because they're not, but when those differences are emphasized, they become a spearhead for whatever project that any given empire wants to use them for. And going back to
think about the vainglory of all these nations who want their independence, right? And the kind of almost fantastical history that they create, right?
Yeah.
And then and implicit in that is this vision of the future, which is at one time, pragmatic and farcical, and at the other time glorious. It's very bizarre, and it's kind of like, what if Europe was Christ's empire? It pales so much in comparison to that. It's I don't even know where to begin.
Well, like, it's really a degradation of, like you were saying, like the conditions of, I mean, petty nationalism being like this grandiose idea, but at the same time smashing up against the rocks of practicality. Like, even if like you were, this is a very complicated question because it goes into like the spiritual.
Like, even in the Muslim Arabic world, this has happened, right? Like what I'm talking about. Except they're at a point where, like, it's not as fractured, I suppose. like they have more
Well, like
commonalities.
Islam
They
has
don't.
united them more or less, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, but it's not too different. Sorry.
No, but like, yeah, but that's a good
Gio.
point though, because I was gonna say, like, even if you like read what Gagnon said about the Europeans adopting progress, like, or the idea of it, like the weird absence of Christianity, or that idea of like a heliocentric world picture, to quote John David Ebert, has really like left this hole. And if you were to like look at it as a weird form of like geopolitical deterritorialization between the relationship between America and the rest of Europe, where you're saying how America becomes this wilderness that is sort of like the war machine that essentially will be appropriated by the state, which is old world Europe. Europe is like being like this repository of difference and an older mode of being, let's say, like what Baudrillard said. Whereas America is like this new, exciting frontier where European man expanded. But I guess like the European elites, they thought, well, America being a necessary evil, like the chickens will come home to roost, and then eventually America will be this prodigal son that will breathe life as a war machine into the state apparatus of Europe. But in reality, we know that it's actually America who's dictating everything. Like, and the older European oligarchies, they're done for. And actually, the war machine is like totally taken over. Even like, okay, like even when you talk about petty nationalism, like even if you were like a weirdo Marxoid, you could say that basic realities of capitalist realism would even dictate that a lot of these older, smaller nations that do coast on their history, but nevertheless cannot compete with the basic realities of centralization and capital and flows of capital and so forth that necessitate that America be at the head of pretty much all world affairs. So America being like the ultimate crescendo of the Anglosphere. So Europe is a very precarious position. So a lot of these people that do want this independence, but they also want to inflict trauma upon their old world enemies, especially Russia, that has gone through its own sort of like political, even ethnogenesis. They're like the seen as like this repository of tradition and fascism and so forth. Which, I mean, it's very funny because if you actually read Kondylis, he talks about this, about the overturning of tradition in these old world nations in favor of this new, what he calls planetary politics, which I mean, some Marxists would call capitalist realism. I like to call transnational.
That was really great. The stream, I caught most of it that you and Prude did. That was fantastic.
Oh yeah, like I highly recommend. You can get the PDF for free if you Google it. Kondylis is planetary politics after the Cold War. And the sort of like stripping of tradition becomes this very strategic thing. And it's very funny how you have like European nationalists that hate Russia that are embodied, they're at the end of that process. And America's basically just picking off the bones. But they have this like weird postmodern appropriation of their own historical myths in order to attack what they see as an even more traditionalist, even more fascistic, even more quote unquote backwards power, which is Russia, and maybe to an extent China. But China's like, I mean, China's in the background, but I don't think the average European cares nearly enough about China as they do Russia. So the point being is that it's like a strategic use. It's like the dangling of the carrot. But I'm of the opinion that, how shall I say this? Like I am pro-European to the extent that like a lot of American right-wingers, they have this like, fuck you, you're Euro-poor, you're nobody, we own you. Like I think that attitude is ultimately corrosive because I think that European originated peoples have to more or less band together in this world. But at the same time, I think that a lot of these Eurocrats that have more or less contempt for their own people as well, that they're like in the back rooms and they're sort of plotting out this like weird psycho history where no, actually like America will come to their senses and they'll realize that it's the old world powers of Europe that have to emerge as the real, that we're going to like maintain our glorious, trajectory. It's like that's delusional. That's delusional.
Yeah, I mean, I think both camps are completely delusional.
Oh,
like,
yeah, definitely. America, Washington's completely delusional as well. But yeah, go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, in a way, America has become like this substitute. Like again, I say for the lack of vision, right? What Christendom could not maintain together,
Yeah.
And nationalism. Like I'm so glad you brought up the rejection of the heliocentric understanding of the world, which implicitly pushes forward the pleasure principle.
Yeah.
And in many ways, that's connected with nationalism as well, to a degree, right? Because it's very pragmatic. Like think of the individual. Well, I guess there's nothing. I guess I'm alienated from this universe. What's left? Well, I mean, the pleasure principle is left, right?
Yeah.
And
you're but a pale blue
and
dot.
I find that that's
yeah.
I find that's quite close to this idea of petty nationalism as well, in a weird way, right? They do, like, one does seem to arise out of the other. Historically speaking,
well, the
I could be wrong about causality, but
well, no, there's a lot of people that, I mean, for the record, though, we're not like bashing nationalism as a concept, because nationalism is like a very popular concept in the E-right, especially like on the potentiality of Trump being elected again. But I do think that the proliferation of nationalism, like you were saying, GSP, like it's obviously a byproduct of the age of secularity and secularization. Like even Charles Taylor's like kind of a libtard, but like he was more or less correct when he talked about that in a secular age. Nationalism.
Yeah. I mean, the EU is a secular substitute for it, right? But they need America to be in there to sustain it.
America,
even though America's robbing them blind.
Right? Yeah, America's going to like give them their petty nationalism, but they're gonna like really do it. It's like they're gonna have a collective military presence, but that's in the restorationist, revanchist project of these like micro-nationalisms. It's kind of like, it's very strange thinking. And I think the Ukrainian war has really like driven the contradictions home, because that thinking is sort of delusional. Because in actuality, you're just going to be a pawn to be fed into the war machine, to be fed in the meat grinder. Like that's,
which they've outright told you.
Yeah.
This isn't just implied. Yeah. They've outright said this to you.
Yeah. I had this skit. I had this short film in mind. I think I told Kino Corner this, because he's been producing some short films here and there, where say there's like a nuclear war. And I came up with this because there's like these channels on YouTube about like you're listening to the radio during a thermonuclear war. You're listening to the radio during the winter apocalypse. I think it's called it's called an ambient escapade. So I had this idea of like a pro-European thing, but like say there's a nuclear war and you have like the heads of the EU and the Americans. There's like this sort of like stereotypical like, post-World War II like MacArthur figure that's essentially telling the Eurocrats that they have to like give up their populations, their way of life. They have to like be fed into like another global war. And they're like, but don't worry, it's going to be fine, because the idea of like, Western democracy is going to be saved. But then these Eurocrats, it's going to be like, a character drama. But then these Eurocrats are going like, but, like our populations are going to be destroyed, and like we're going to be turned into third world countries, and like what's going to happen? And then of course like the Americans are like, well, that's the price you have to pay for global democracy. So it's like this weird like a pre-apocalyptic type of like world war confrontation where America will essentially like euthanize its own children in Europe. Like it's, no, but that's like, I thought about it could be like a play or something, a short film, but I think like the relations, I mean, I don't know, like a lot of right wingers, they also have this idea that in a way it's like sort of a cuck discourse, because it's sort of like it posits America as like the source of evil, and it like strays into like third worldism discourse, which it can, but at the same time, like you can't my opinion, you can't really bracket yourself off from reality. You have to say that, America obviously has, maybe not the American people, but certainly Washington has a vested interest in the subjugation or the tacit control of these European nations, especially,
of course. And you want to talk about
last few
third
years.
worldism.
For sure.
Look at the migrant policy that, in no small part, the Americans have played a massive role in. If we're being honest, especially
Yeah.
post Libya, the destruction of Libya, that really opened the migrant floodgates the first time. The policy of Europe versus Turkey, and there's a number of examples. And look, somebody living in the United States, has lived in the United States my entire life, and well, I don't hate the nation itself or even most of its people. The government in Washington, and maybe this was an inevitability, maybe it was always going to end up this way, who knows? The government in Washington is objectively a corrosive force, no matter where in the world it is, and it has a propensity. And funny enough, a lot of American right wingers would admit this. You get those libertarian streaks come out that no matter what it does, even under the quote unquote best of intentions, always makes things worse. It can always drops the ball in some way, and you can say sometimes incompetent, sometimes it's intentional. And I think, like you were saying, that is just a fact of reality you have to come to grips with in one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up this conversation, and in many ways, the springboard for it was explaining, how Biden destroyed Nord Stream 2, right?
Yeah.
And that fundamentally shows the kind of distrust that both the Americans and the Europeans have with each other. The Americans don't trust the Europeans becoming more wealthy. To them, that is always a sign that eventually they will become independent. On the other hand, you look at the way, as you said, the way Biden was greeted compared to Trump.
Yeah.
Right. In many ways, you could argue that, of course, the deal for Nord Stream 2 was realized before Trump was elected. And the laying down of the pipes and all that happened, I think, just before or just after he got elected, but wasn't sworn in. Okay. I don't think that one affects the other, because the deal was done before that. And of course, Nord Stream 1 was already completed in Bush's second term. So anyways, but there is that mistrust, right? And, back in 2008, 2007, 2006, Europe was doing really well in comparison to America, of course, the 2008 crash and so on. So there's always been this kind of mistrust. But on the other hand, you mentioned the Skittles fiasco. When it comes down to it, though, like, the Europeans want to become comfortable and wealthy, of course. That makes it easier to rule. On the other hand, I mean, their own polities, right? As long as people understand what I'm talking about. But when it came right down to it, they will be loyal for America to be there, because for their own lack of vision, because of the rivalries that have festered there after the end of the Middle Ages, or the aristocratic orders that arose during the time of the Middle Ages and lingered onwards well into the colonial period. So I don't know, like, I guess, you have America's bizarro vision of what the West should be, like totally insane, totally unhinged, flying away from the solar system into levels of bizarreness. And then you have the Europeans without any kind of vision to unify them.
Yeah.
Although the urge is still there. But I mean, the EU is such a, I don't know, it's such an insufficient thing.
Well, that's why Kojev, like, that's how he envisioned, as for those who don't know, Alexander Kojev was the Hegelian Marxist political theorist professor that then became a bureaucrat who was basically the architect of the EU. And that's why he came up with the universal homogeneous state, the idea, which, I mean, Fukuyama then later took and bastardized and turned into like mass market slop. but the idea essentially that you have to destroy, or rather erase, a consciousness of history, and you have to implement this extreme ahistorical version of humanity in order to liberate yourself from these petty concerns, which again is sort of like a consciousness that can, a consciousness of a bureaucrat that can only arise in Europe, given their history, that to sort of like free yourself or liberate yourself from the shackles of your own sort of like petty historical grievances. But of course that backfired, because then the EU became this like massive, unsustainable, inefficient bureaucracy that instead re-entrenched a lot of these older prejudices and so forth. But Europe not having vision, I mean, I don't really necessarily know what Washington's vision of Europe is besides tourist attraction, Disneyland / aged but yet
large
useful
black
population.
women.
Yeah. Repository to fight various global wars. Like, I don't understand like what Washington's vision is. It can't be good, because essentially, historically, if you're placing your destiny into the hands of an externalized power, I mean, you don't have to like read Mersheimer or who is that other realist? Waltz, the one that Prude always reads. What's his name? McKinnon. Oh, I forget. Anyways, one of the realists.
Yeah.
Something like
that. You mean the former CIA director?
Yeah.
George Kennan?
George Kennan, yeah. Like, you don't have to read Kennan to realize that if you're ceding your own destiny into the hands of external power, then you're not really in the driver's seat at that point. And so I don't understand. Like, it's very funny because in America, I could be wrong because I'm a Canadian, but again, I think I understand most of my friends being America, having traveling to America very often. So forth.
An Anglophone country, mostly Anglophone country, right on our border is going to have probably a pretty good pulse on what's happening here. So I'll give you, I'll give you my two Canadians here,
especially
especially
you live in Ontario.
Here. Yes.
Yeah. So, especially where I live near the falls, so it's like I think I have a good idea. So what I mean is that. So preface this by saying I'm Canadian. I'll never, whatever. Maybe one day I'll move to America, but who knows? So what I mean is, okay, you have a weird dichotomy when it comes to the attitudes of Americans towards Europe, besides the usual like boorish indifference that's stereotypical, which is fine, whatever, right? Freedom fries, yeah. So you have, like, on the one hand, the political left, which is that Europe is either more sophisticated, more progressive, more cultural, but also at the same time, Europe is like this backwards, they're basically they're enmeshed in history, which is a bad thing to the American progressive. On the political right, you have either like extreme Europhilic trad deference. So you have like a lot of people that, for example, like alt-righters, they, have this thing about pan-Europeanism, or you have like even people who are like post-right, I guess you could call them post-right, people like, Big Spence or Richard Hanania, who like have like this weird, also equally Europhilic view, but also they're like pro-NATO and pro-GAE or whatever. And then, of course, you have like an American rightist anti-European, anti-Euro view, which is like the Europores are not like in keeping with like America's tradition of like rugged frontiersmen, and they're like inherently cucked, effeminate, and whatever. So you have like on both political sides in America, you have like this weird dichotomy where Europe is this like imagined horizon where it could be either good or bad depending on what your position is. Like either it's like a totally progressive, totally cultured, sophisticated, not like boorish redneck America, or it's like backwards cesspit that still clings on to their petty nationalism, or they're like a totally like Mother Europa, Hyperborean spinny wheel return to Mother Europa, or they're like Eurocucks, that, you know, don't have freedom fries. So it's like a weird political dichotomy when it comes to American attitudes towards Europe.
Well, I know you touched on it for a moment there, but I did want to return to one of your points where there is this growing anti-Europe sentiment on the left where Europeans are poor and racist. I went over there expecting to find liberal Disneyland, but they all turned out to be it's even whiter than America. How could this be?
And it's more racist than America. But,
yeah, I mean, they're so. I mean, it's a shock to them because America is so anti-historical.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, like they're rebelling against history all the time. You know, I was talking to a friend who's still technically. I mean, she's technically an American citizen, but she's lived her entire life here. One of her parents was American. Both her parents have passed away. But you know, we were talking about this, and like, you know, I said we were talking about like, I said you have to understand you live in a post-World War II America, right? You ever wonder why Mitt Romney is Hitler? Trump is Hitler, Putin is Hitler, Saddam Hussein is Hitler. Like you ever wonder why all these people are Hitler?
Yeah, there's so many Hitlers. It's the microfascism of Adorno. But yeah, go ahead.
She was the one who was. She said, "Oh, have you checked out so and so? She's a historian on Substack. You know, she reads me this thing about." Fascism is about a small collective of people helping another collective of people prosper. And I said, that's literally every system ever. What are you talking about? You think democracy doesn't do that? I go, you know, like, you know, I said, you know why authoritarian systems don't have deep states? Because everybody can see the deep state. It's not deep.
It's one big deep state. Yeah.
I mean, I go, you have a deep state because you have pretensions that you're not the same thing, right? I go, there's a lot of oligarchs that are very invested in this notion that there's no deep state, or the deep state keeps us safe, right? It's because of the stupid democratic interface, like that. You know, the massages and soothes your ego that you know you have the power to change things, and you just vote this guy in. He's a temporary CEO of the country, and and then once this temporary CEO is gone, like it's just even on its own pretensions, like it's stupid, right? Like it's unbelievable the kind of promises it makes, right? Like you didn't, anyways. You know,
but that's why like their top issue is like democracy is on the like that's like when they pull Democrats, like their top concern is besides abortion is like democracy. But what the fuck does that even mean?
Democracy is on the ballot.
Yeah, like what does that mean? Like
the people might vote against democracy. This can't be.
Yes.
We have to suspend the Constitution to free the Constitution.
She's scared of Trump winning. I go, why are you afraid of Trump winning? I told you. Her and I were roommates, and I said, why are you afraid of Trump winning? Like, didn't I tell you in 2016 literally nothing would happen? Like, I told you why I wanted him to win, because it was funny. Like, because of all the stupid idiots who were afraid, it was hilarious to see them like completely losing their minds, right? Like,
yeah, it's hilarious.
I've never seen people believe a fairy tale as much as these people, and they're actually crying and like beating other people up, burning stuff down. That's how much they believe this.
Remember
that's kind of funny. You know, you can't say that's not funny shit. All right, I'm sorry, but
remember that thing that shouted no when they
and in 2020,
Trump?
like they took it away from him. I said, like, whatever, you know, like. I go, he's a known commodity now, right? Like, you know, I go, why are you afraid of it? He goes, well, you know, his backers. I go, which backers? What, you mean the Zionists? Like, yeah, those guys. Like, she's Jewish on her father's side, right? Except he was a secular Jew. He sent them to Sunday school, Christian camp. Like, I kid you not. I mean, I've known her for 24 years, so like, and she's a friend of the family. and we used to work together. So I'm just saying, like, I'm just saying, like, I, I I didn't ask, but I know those weren't the people you think. I go that are funding him. I said, Edelman, his wife, Edelman's passed away, but his wife is funding him. She's a Zionist. I go, don't you see, like basically, if they want him to win, it's because it's there to give Israel carte blanche, right? I said, the neocons like, Newland, Applebaum, Kagan. Yeah, those people are Jewish, but they're invested in the destruction of Russia first, because if you
Yeah, that's why they hate Trump. Yeah.
yeah, because for them it's kind of like the difference in strategy that Obama had from Bush, right? Like with them, like their strategy, I'm just saying, value free, as academic agent says, value free assessment. In a way, they're right. If you destroy Russia, all else will fall into place, right? Because it's the only power that can ever empower all these other places, right? We'll get into the other news. Like, for instance, Russia supplied Su-35s to Iran and S-400s. Okay, that's good. Israel's retaliation was not impressive, but remember Israel's retaliation after Iran's retaliation over the embassy bombing in Syria was also not that big. Well, how much of that plays with what Russia is doing in terms of like supplying them with defense? I don't know. However, this week, Russia gave Iran the patent to make their own Su-34s and Su-30s. So now they're going to make their own aircraft, comparable aircraft to like, various fourth gen fighters. That's a deterrence. Like Iran has a deterrence. And so you can see the neocon point of view, right? Like you cannot offer Russia a sweet enough deal that they abandon Iran, abandon China, get balkanized, right? Because that was supposed to happen in the 90s. That was the whole point of the two Chechen wars, was this, because here's Russia in the worst economic state it's been in over 100 years. You've fomented two Chechen wars inside Russian territory, right? But the country still did not break up, right? That must have been frustrating. That must have been frustrating. And so Ukraine is the next option. That's why in 2008 in Budapest, we're gonna bring Ukraine into NATO, because they're very frustrated, right? Georgia didn't work out in August 2008 either. So, Donnie, of course, they're going to kick the can on Russia down the road. The point is, we're going to give Israel what it wants, because on some level, Israel is panicking about America's strength in the world. And if they don't do this now, they're never going to be able to do it. So,
well, at least JD Vance is here. That's even a secret one. So, like, definitely.
By the way, remember we were talking off there.
Yeah.
You said, what about Agenda 2025? It's so funny to hear shitlibs talking like magapedes, but it's and then I said to you, she literally mentioned Agenda 2025. I'm going like, oh my god, will you stop this? Like you people like ridiculed like
Alex Jones.
all the MAGA people and Alex Jones people, like you're not different than them, like except like they're more right than you are.
Yeah, their conspiracies are less bonkers. Yeah,
literally less bonkers.
Your optimism disgusts me. That's all it comes down to. It's like, I wish we were living in the world you thought we were living in, but unfortunately, things have only gotten worse since 2017, believe it or not. And for all the positive things you can say about Trump, my pessimistic disposition leads me to say that things are probably going to get worse in the next 4 to 8 years as well. Please go on.
No, you said something before, Constantine. Do you remember when? I think it was.
It was probably just a throwaway comment. In which case we can move on.
Oh, I think you said, like, do you remember when in 2020? Was it 2020?
2020.
I said, when GSP was.
It escapes me if we remembered. I'll come back to it.
I mean, I see, like, a lot of people are saying that there's like a new energy that in some ways is even bigger than 2016. I mean, there definitely is, because a lot more people are in tune to the Trumpian message than in 2016. Because in 2016, it was sort of like, well, let's see how far Trump can go. And it's very funny. And, you know, we'll see how far he can develop. But now that there's like a lot of coherent force to where, I mean, whether or not this is actually true, you can never know. But it seems that there's like a rival elite behind Trump. You know, people like Musk and Thiel and so forth. But at the same time,
That's what wasn't allowed in 2016 and 2020.
Yeah, exactly. A rival
I think
elite.
that's where the extra energy comes from, you know, the extra optimism.
No, exactly. But I still can't shake the feeling that it's this week is Halloween, then it's next week. I still can't shake the feeling that a huge rug pull is underway. I mean, I know that like black pillars, I know people that like black pillars go in the crystals for 5,000 years, 5 million years. I know, okay, I'm sorry, right? Black pillars get to, you know, we're going to put you in the crystals for 5 billion years. But at the same time, I still can't shake the feeling that the election's going to be brutally close either way. And if it is really close, there's a good chance that 2020 will happen again. And if that happens, there will be such a huge, I can't even fathom it, what's going to happen. I mean, the E-right, for instance, will be not totally destroyed. I shouldn't say that. But the current iteration of the E-right would be severely, severely shaken up and affected.
In shambles.
In shambles, because we've invested so much into Trump and Trumpism and the memes and the images, the iconic images, that if there isn't that like final, like it's like pro wrestling, like if there isn't that final pay-per-view payoff match where the face wins over the heel, it's a giant jerk off.
Well,
you know what I mean? It's go home heat. So, yeah.
I think one of the other big concerns about that is if we do get, let's say, beat by beat repeat of 2020, where a bunch of states conspicuously vote Democrat, vote for Kamala, and then you have the massive backlash against that in the form of maybe another January 6th, they're going to crack down hard with every NGO and federal apparatus that they have to shut up. Maybe not people like us because we're too small, but maybe even people like you, people you know who are probably bigger than you. They're going to do everything they can to shut up any conversation that falls outside of what they find acceptable.
Well, Musk will be persecuted.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
They will.
Yeah.
They will probably try to bring up some sort
They'll
of legal
fucking
charge
RICO
against him.
law him.
Yeah, they'll do everything they can against him. They will drag him through the court system. Not only Musk, but I mean, plenty of other people as well. Certainly Trump. I mean, we have to remember that Trump's sentencing date is still scheduled. I think it's November 21st, November 22nd. Point being, it's about 3 weeks after the election where Trump's sentencing, which has been delayed twice already from July onward, is still pending. And we'll have to see what happens after the election. I don't know, maybe they'll delay it again depending on the election results. But in the event that there is some sort of rug pull that you alluded to, not only is there going to be a crackdown on discourse on Musk, especially with the whole Twitter X thing, but Trump himself. And one might say they wouldn't want to rock the boat too much. They wouldn't want to throw too much fuel on the fire. But I think if they're willing to do that again, they've accepted that they either win or it's that, and that they are pulling all punches, and they aren't pulling any punches, excuse me, and are doing everything within their power in order to secure the status quo.
Well, like I said this on DA, I said this with Prude, like people, they look at people like a lot of like posters, they'll look at people like Scott Greer, or they'll look at people like James Kirkpatrick, and like, oh, you're a black pillar, oh, like, you know, you have to have faith that, like, you know, Trump and to an extent definitely is like a metaphysical force that he bends reality to his will. But at the same time, if you really truly look at what they're saying, are they wrong? I mean, yeah, okay, Scott Greer can be an asshole, blah, blah, blah. James Kirkpatrick can be a black pillar, blah, blah, blah. But are they wrong? Can you say that the regime will do everything in their power not to... I mean, there are certain signs where people are saying that, the regime is more or less trying to make peace with a new Trump presidency. But I mean, that could just be smoke and mirrors. That could just be lowering people's guard down. And it doesn't really matter that Kamala is like staging a historically bad campaign, because it's not really about Kamala Harris.
I would say it's a genuine
It's not really
divide.
about that.
This is really about the ruling ideology. This is really about the ruling theopolitics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I do think there is a genuine divide between those in the elite who will do everything in their power to stop Trump, and those who think they can make their peace with him. So I don't think it's an either-or prospect. It's just a matter of who is going to have the upper hand come election day in the following weeks afterward. Because this has the potential to be another nightmare, even though some people are saying that this might just be said and done. Although, when you look at some of this, not to get too much into horse race politics numbers, not to get too much into electoral numbers, you look at the party affiliation of early voters, it's leaning much more Republican than it was last time. And as we know with just basic election statistics, typically Republicans will vote on election day. But when it comes to the mail-in ballots, which are a whole problem in and of themselves that we could get into at another time, and the early voting, while the Democrats still lead in those, the margins are much narrower than they were, say, in 2020. I know 2020 is not a fair basis to judge something on because it was so much of an outlier. But even still, it is our most recent election. We are still dealing with a lot of the consequences of what happened in 2020, even down to the way our voting system works. So I could see why a lot of people have cause for optimism, but I definitely agree. Even under the best case circumstance, it's going to be a very tough uphill battle. I'm not saying it's impossible that Trump can win, of course not, but it's going to be a pitched battle, if you will. Of course, in the political sense, not the Fed post or anything, but it's going to be something that they are going to fight tooth and nail for, frankly, on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I do agree with Scott Greer that like the possibility of a civil war by like boomer conservatives is not realistic. But in some ways, I forget who said this. It may have been...
My friend literally thought that was a possibility.
Yeah.
Like, she literally thought that was...
But they made the movie and everything. Of course it is.
They made the movie, yeah. The Alex Garland film. But, no, but, like, they're making a new 28 Days Later. It's called 28 Years Later. I can't wait for that. 28 Days Later is, like, my favorite film when I was a kid. No, but, like, they say, I think it was on Night Owls, I think it was Future Moldovan that said that it would be, like, a reverse of 2020, but only with, instead of mail-in ballots, they'll have early voting. So all Republicans, because there is a huge enthusiasm for Trump, like real MAGA peds, they're going to go and vote early when their state is opening up for early voting. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to actual election day, and when it especially comes to mail-in ballots, then all of a sudden it will kind of be like, I mean, if they do intend to fortify, quote unquote, then maybe it will be like 2020 where all the Republicans, like all the true MAGA patriots, all the Q boomers, they're voting early. But those numbers will either stagnate or go up slightly. And then when the early voting is done, and then when you have the primary voting and the mail-in ballots, then you'll have a lot of that weird things that happened during 2020 in places like Arizona and Pennsylvania. And it will come down, a lot of people are predicting that it'll come down to like one state. It'll come down to like Pennsylvania deciding who the president is. Kind of like in 2000 with George Bush.
Well, there is something funny that could happen, extremely funny that could happen in that scenario.
Yeah.
Is that Kamala lose the election because Michigan Muslims either don't turn out or don't vote for her.
That would be hilarious.
That would be great, yeah. Apparently Trump's winning over the Michigan Muslims.
Oh, yeah, I mean, according to the recent polls, actually Jill Stein was in first place among them, then Trump, and then Kamala in a distant third.
Wow.
Oh! How did Jill Stein win them over?
Probably
because they don't want
issue.
either. They know Trump is a Zionist. They know Kamala, to them, is a sellout.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to vote for either.
Oh my
I'm still gonna
God.
vote, damn it, but I'm not gonna vote for those two. It's not good, but it's a loss of votes. It's the Democrats who lose out on them. But
Yeah.
how much, is that a really big number? I don't know, maybe.
But then there's also voter apathy. How many of them just won't show up?
That's
Yeah.
true. Like it, I don't know if it'll be energized because like the thing that the Democrats had for 2020 was they endured 4 years of Trump,
Yeah.
right? Where literally nothing ever happened except in their fantasies, and now they've lived 4 years of Biden, and so some have forgotten or some have had time to reevaluate things. But I think also what can't be overlooked is if like the media still demonizes Trump. Like I saw an article in the Atlantic, why does Trump sound like Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler? Right? Like I guess one autocrat wasn't enough, right? So all
By
three.
Applebaum, by the way.
But yes, by Applebaum, no
And
less. It's
Applebaum,
just so
yeah.
cringe. Of course, it's her.
Remember when
Any-
she said she landed in Poland after the Kamala speech, and she's like, Polish people, they were clapping for Kamala.
My ass.
Because
My
Trump
ass,
is
they
a
were
singer.
clapping.
yeah.
It's so.
Trump is his ear. Yeah, and he's,
Yeah.
Married to Sikorsky, never forget.
Yes, that's right. What an idiot. What was he even thinking? So, anyways, so
I shilled
I
for the
mean, the way
American
the way
Empire,
I look
and
at
all
it
I got
is,
was a mid-Jewish wife.
I know, right?
not even like a hot one. Not even like
I know,
when
like
Kumaraswamy married Stella Blash, she was 17-year-old prime Jewish dancer, art ho. Like, imagine marrying
Art
your
ho.
Jewish art ho. Yeah. Imagine marrying like a Red Scare art ho who happens to be Jewish. But anyways, what are you saying?
Yes. What were you saying? Okay. So we can say that the media did not eviscerate Trump the way it did in 2016 and in 2020.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Right? A lot of things that they could have deployed against him, it didn't happen. Primarily because Biden's showing was so bad that and Trump really, like again, a lot of this was, the fantasies of shit libs. I suppose Charlottesville, it almost became real, I suppose, for many of them. In any case, you know what? A lot of those things, if they had just been ignored, nothing would have happened. But you can't ignore shit libs. Like some of them, even though they're regime pets, they do believe in the mythology of power from the bottom up, changing power on top, right? Like, because they have no recollection of elites during the French Revolution that sided with the lower classes in order to topple their fellow elites at the top.
High, low versus middle, more or less.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they have no recollection of that. So they think it just happened. Like, they're nuts, right? They
think Trump's being backed by like dark right-wing money, whatever the fuck
Oh,
that is. Yeah. That
The-
actually, like, since Ronnie Reagan, there was this thread that blew up on Twitter, that like this boomer libtard who was like, since Ronnie Reagan, like the wholesome chungus, egalitarian hippies, like the elite authoritarians are ready to like bring fascism out of the grave at any time, and that the grassroots wholesome chungus hippies are going to be like subverted. And it was, I said, like, it's so delusional. Like, this is what they believe. They believe that the elites are like pro-Trump because Trump's going to like bring Hitler back. Like, he's going to bring.
In a way, their ideology is dying. Like, in a way, they've reached the
Yeah.
limits of their ideology, and like believing in this is like Trump unifies them and reinvigorates their ideology.
Yeah.
Right. But they have to do like a lot of, creative writing around him. So I'm talking to her and I said, there are two basic factions that can each be broken down into two parts, right? Like beginning with Trump's assassination. So you could say there is the Zionist branch that wants Trump in, right? And it will be to try to do something for Israel, maybe a lot will be accomplished, maybe a little bit will be accomplished. It will be at the expense of Palestinians. But something will have to be done to Iran. How are you going to manipulate the Russians to go along with this, et cetera, et cetera? But something will have to be. So, like I said, that's one faction. The other faction, of course, is the faction that doesn't want Trump in at all. That faction can be broken down into two groups. The one group that wanted to assassinate Trump.
Yeah.
She goes, how could he miss? I go, he really almost didn't. Like, it was just luck. And so anyways, I said, so that group missed. That's the Biden group. The other group, was the Kamala group. Like, we have to use her. I know no one wants to, but that's what we have to do. The debate proved it definitely that you cannot have Biden run. Because of course, because if you're going to stuff the ballot boxes, if you're going to, no one can believe that many people voted for Biden a second time, especially after his one term. It's just so preposterous. It can't be done, right?
Yeah.
So that's why you have to have Kamala.
Can't steal the whole fucking thing. Like,
yeah. Like, they won't fall for it a second time. So I said, it's just to be the war. Do you continue the war against the Russians? Do you do something crazy there, especially with Ukraine getting weaker and weaker, or do you go with Israel? But that's what I think it will come down to. I think Trump for them is still kind of there's still people who are hesitant about Trump because they don't know if he'll even come through for the Israelis or not. But I don't know. Like, Trump is not like his supporters. Like, I don't think he's not nearly as conservative. I think, I don't know. Like,
he's starting to, at least rhetorically, he's much more aligned with, like,
maybe. Like, I listened to the Pony Express. It was, I think, it was live. And I love Pete Quinones and Charlemagne. I love those guys. And listening to them, they're so astute. I mean, they're very pro-Trump, and I'm not anti-Trump, right? I just, why I have misgivings, and it isn't because I think Trump can be manipulated, right? I mean, you saw that Joe Rogan interview. He says, "Oh, I got along with the military pretty well," and then he talks about how he had to fire most of them, and it's like, well, what do you mean you got along with them pretty
so
well?
stupid.
And let's not forget,
though. He pissed off Millie. That was great.
From Trump's inner
tariffs
circle,
are the most beautiful word in the English language. That was based, though. You got to admit the tariffs.
Yeah. That was great.
Look, I love him. Don't get me wrong. Like, on a personal level, I love him. He's ridiculous, right? I wouldn't have it any other way. But
my uncle was very smart. I think I was smarter than him, but he's very smart. He like loves up talking people. Like, he's very good at that. Like, he's very good at like praising you. If like if you're doing business with him, he's very good. Joe, you're the best. I mean, you're the voice of the UFC. You're the best. And it's like,
if he's elected, then I want that the comedian Shane. He has to go to the White House. Like, there has to be two Trumps.
Shane Gillis.
Yeah. Shane Gillis. Oh my God. I would love that. But so I think those facts, like, I said to her, I think, an assassination attempt on Trump after he's elected is not improbable at all. She goes, why do you think that is? I said, because you just spent sorry for my language, because he spent 8 effing years telling everybody, like telling every goofball he's Hitler and he's going to do this. And I go, you have to understand, this deranged people who believe it. I said, how can America ever become that? It doesn't even have an ethnogenesis.
Yeah.
Like, that too has been sequestered, right? It had a chance where it almost happened. Anyways, I told her, I said, don't you understand that after the Holocaust, this was never like in order to prevent that from happening, you would need a right wing that was literally there to stop any kind of ethnic right wing, any kind of ethnic. I go, you don't know that? Have you not figured that out? Like that's why every enemy is Hitler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need conservative.
She literally,
Yeah.
she agreed with me. I'm telling you, like I thought like.
What do you think,
like,
William F. Buckley and National Review? What the fuck do you think their purpose was? You know,
I know. I go, don't you understand that? They're like a flypaper. They're like their whole point is to stop that for those people from going through.
they're a filter for the
And I
real
go,
right
and you
wing.
still worry about a takeover? I go, how? They're like the white population in America is divided in half almost, right?
Look,
And they're only like 59% of the population, and you think like it'll be like Weimar, like I go, Germany was a monolith. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, anyways, I didn't say, I wasn't that rude. I didn't say, what are you talking about? Internally, I was kind, but internally, I'm going like, oh my God, I know after, no matter how much she agrees, in 3 days, she will then like say the same talking points.
I don't know about you guys, but the thought of a Civnet Hitler keeps me up at night.
Civnet Hitler. Oh my God.
That's kind of like, oh, I shouldn't mention this, but that's kind of like the whole.
Well, you know what?
Like,
maybe a
Chungus
Civnet Hitler is possible.
Yeah,
I gotta tell you what happened today. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
So after liturgy, I'm downstairs having coffee, and there's a young guy. You're gonna think I'm making this up. Okay, I'm sorry. He's Iranian. He's Persian. Always says he's Persian. He's a convert. Both of these guys, young guys, are converts. One of them is 19. The other one is 20. The Persian guy's name is Aryan. And he's already mentioned one of the, let's say, right-wing channels that's very gung-ho about Nietzsche. I go, oh, that Irish guy? Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I'm going like, holy shit. So anyways.
He probably has seen some Biggie Slanka Hyperborean edits. Yeah.
Right. Now, the other guy is Vietnamese. So I'm talking to them. And we're talking about geopolitics. I'm giving them the same spiel that I'm giving you guys about two factions, because, you know, the Republicans, they're bifurcated, you know, the Mitch McConnells, they have more in common with the neocons, but they tend to agree more with the Zionists and the neocons. It's a different strategy. It's not necessarily a preference, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got, you know, the split, and the Democrats assassinate Trump, keep Biden, or, you know, give Kamala a chance. Okay. So, but they're tugging between the Zionists. Like this is what gives Trump some leverage, is that the Zionist Republicans can be okay with them, because as much as they hate Russia, they probably hate the Arab world and China even more.
Yeah, they hate Muslims even more. Yeah.
Yes. So maybe they think if they defeat Iran and humiliate Russia and Syria, it'll take care of everything that they want. Okay. So I'm talking to them, and you know, and I said, you know, the elites basically these elites, and they go, I think we know what elites we're talking about here, right?
I wonder if they're both listening to a certain personality of, you know.
No, they don't know I have I would never tell them.
But I wonder if they were listening to a certain popular streamer that appeals to that demographic of. Never mind. Don't worry about it.
No idea what it could mean.
A Vietnamese guy and Iranian guy, both talking about, you know, oh well. Anyways, Hitler. Yeah, about Hitler. No, but it's
civic nationalist Hitler.
Wholesome Chungus Hitler. No, but it's very funny though, because I think Trump, he like really strays between both worlds, because his younger base certainly is anti-Israeli. I mean, okay,
yeah,
you can say that like they're indifferent in the sense that like when October 7th happened, you had like, you know, sort of like ironic,
they're indifferent.
Yeah, either indifference or like ironic tongue-in-cheek, like performative Zionism, but that's really just to like own the libs, right? That's just like to piss off the libs, right? It wasn't like really sincere. Although there are some people that theorize that like certain elements of the right, they're like conning people or whatever, but I'm not gonna imbibe any of those like conspiracies. But I do think that you have like either when it comes to younger people in the political right, even people that have been accused of like by there's a certain faction that goes around calling everybody Jewish. Like all these people are very Israeli skeptic, no matter what. Like on the younger side.
Well, did you see the new polling data on that?
Yeah, the new polling data actually does confirm this. Yeah.
Yeah, where the majority of young Republicans support an arms embargo to Israel.
Yes, yeah. So either like it doesn't matter like what e-daddy or what e-celeb you currently are in the faction of, whether like you eat McDonald's or you lift weights. I'm not going to name the two factions. Either way, you're like not really that gassed up in Israel. But when you have like when you see like for example this rally in tonight in Madison Square Garden, then you have like Israeli flags. You have Giuliani that went up there, said Ronald Reagan told me that we can't abandon Israel because Israel's always been there for us. Like he literally said this, right? And then Keith Woods is clipping it, So like the point being is that you have this like weird dichotomy where Trump himself will at one end say like Israel's our greatest friend, we got to protect Israel, but then he'll say I don't really agree with regime changing Iran. I think that I could probably sit down with the mullahs like Reagan did. And it's like, and so like you have this like, bending of the will that is centered in Trump, where, the younger people certainly are anti-Zionist, but yet the like Republican old guard that will vote Trump in, they're like still, Israel is this beacon of Western civilization in the dark brown Middle East. And it's like, Trump really is straying between this like contradiction. So yeah.
And you saw this in his first term too, where he constantly walked back and forth between all this. Where the whole fire and fury comments, which were more about North Korea, but I mean I suppose that even applies in that case too. But then a few months later, he's sitting down with Kim Jong-un, where he talks about maximum pressure on the Iranians. But we can have a summit. We can arrange that. Where we called it back on this program, I think 2018 and 2019. Trump's foreign policy in his first term was schizophrenic, and especially considering declining American power, I expect no less schizophrenia from Trump's foreign policy, where he has to tout both lines in order to keep people both at home and abroad on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, the only way, a pleasant Trump presidency where the Ukraine war is brought to an end.
Yep.
Israel is pulled back. Can only happen if there's a kind of a satiation of these forces that are pushing these things, but at the same time, maybe America is happy with the outcome. Okay, they've impoverished Europe for probably at least a generation. We won't have to worry about Europe rising above us. Lebanon is destroyed. Israel, you're still on top. We'll keep destroying the Middle East. Just hold off right now for 4 years or whatever it'll be. Like it would have to be something like that, right? Well, the rest of the world goes on, but the rest of the world is going on in different ways. And, one of those ways is BRICS just keeps expanding, and it's got nothing to do with like who controls most of the market and the who has the lion's share. These people want a way to never have to worry about American sanctions, right? Like what they're doing directly contradicts what like the American regime wants. And and as we saw, like Israel, I mean, Israel attacked a few things. There were 4 servicemen that were killed. There was a military warehouse that was destroyed. But overall, it was not significant. If you saw the amount of missiles, I don't mean just the Iranian ones, but the ones that followed a week or so later after the Iranians were done, just by Hezbollah, like, I don't think Israel feels secure. I don't. I think they want more, and that's the part that worries me. Like the part that says, I can pull the brakes. I just don't know I don't see, like, we talk about Macron making certain allusions that resonate with a kind of more arcane idea of Europe, even Europe preceding the secular age, the Enlightenment age. Uh, you know, WASPs really don't control America anymore. And
No.
and they just like that Macron is a sellout, they are too, because I just can't see how enabling Israel to do this is helping them. Like, you can talk all you want about Finland and Sweden joining NATO. Like, you just lost Saudi Arabia to BRICS. Like, Saudi Arabia does most of its trade of oil with China, not in US dollars anymore.
And you lost Turkey, which is a NATO ally. I know they'll pivot back and forth, they'll play their
Yeah.
game, but once again, they weren't accepted into BRICS because there are some of their problems with India vis-a-vis the Pakistan issue. But point being is they're going to the BRICS summit, they're constantly talking to the Russians more than they're talking to you. And also to swing back to BRICS, a lot of these countries, like Saudi Arabia, like the Gulf states, are perfectly content having one foot in each camp. They will trade with the Americans, they will trade with the Chinese, they will court both sides of this. But, and I think this is really the crux of why BRICS has been expanding so rapidly and why it's become such a more relevant force, and especially with the summit that just happened, is that the Americans have taken such an absolutist line that it is either complete acquiescence, go along with the sanction regime, go along with all the both foreign and domestic policies we impose on you, or you're not going to be able to participate in our little club, versus BRICS, which is, look, I know it's more nascent, it's more of a loose organization, which is more or less a giant anti-sanctions club. A it's not a common market, but it's a forum of nations that can come together, regardless of ideology, regardless of even national interest, sort of separating political, economic, and foreign policy into the respective camps, which ideally they should be, because you don't want to start damage yourself, say, in economic policy in the pursuit of a foreign policy goal, which in many ways that's what the sanctions turn out to be. Uh, but you have BRICS, which for the time being is a much more open forum. They can discuss these issues with nations, particularly on the issue of trade, versus the American empire at this point, who delivers these ultimatums to these countries that wish to have any dealings with it. And there are some countries that are in the position to simply say no. Now, I know we've discussed Europe extensively on the stream, but a lot of the European countries are not in the position to say no to the American empire. And even if they were, we we've gone into great detail about some of the reasons why they might not say no to the American empire. But like I said, I'm glad you brought up Saudi Arabia. I'm glad you brought up the Gulf states in relation to BRICS, because it does show that this isn't necessarily a burgeoning, like, great anti-Western alliance where many of these countries still do have extensive economic and trade ties with Western nations, and that's probably not going to change unless the West pursues an even more absolutist line than it is right now. And it has opened the door to a lot of, let's say, arrangements I wouldn't have thought would happen for decades at least. For example, the reconciliation happening between Iran and Saudi Arabia right now. Even
They're
the
doing joint naval exercises with Iran and Saudi Arabia right
oh,
now.
absolutely. And then even like the
Mm.
dynamics with Turkey, which I know, like I just said, wasn't officially accepted into BRICS, but has, although it has played both sides for the past several years, is leaning much more to the east, much more towards BRICS. And like I said, a lot of these things I could have seen happening in the long term if current trajectories continued, but I would not have expected it to happen this rapidly. And yes, in many ways, Ukraine was the kicking off point for that. But the West, beyond the economic losses, beyond the greater geopolitical game, just in terms of optics, in my opinion, when it comes to world opinion, has lost out to BRICS, because BRICS looks like a much more open and amenable forum to various countries' national interests. What, like I said, countries that otherwise probably wouldn't have a problem working with the West, but have been forced to choose.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Yeah. Um.
But
Yeah.
uh,
Well, I don't know. I
yeah,
mean,
go on.
Oh no. I mean, it's a very interesting geopolitical situation, and I think like in an odd way, I mean, it is like a clown show and a spectacle, but it's the whole world kind of is holding its breath to see who's going to win this election next week or the week after, and it's kind of very strange. It's a very like I personally just want it to be done with. I kind of almost dread that episode of Digital Archipelago like on Wednesday after the election. It's like I don't know what's going to happen. I still have this feeling that it's not as secure as people think. But at the same time, I mean, there's opportunities in everything, obviously. I mean, even if Trump loses, I mean, there's still, I mean, I don't know. I mean, if Trump loses, it will be a disaster. But like, but then again, I don't know. It's very funny how like the sort of trajectory of the world, and it's probably a product of communication technology and the development of a particular style of like what you would say like is imperial techniques, where one node of the world can control the rest, or rather have influence over the rest. But it is very strange how people are sort of like around the world looking at America, looking at the imperial center, and seeing, okay, like what's going to determine the course, if you will. But a lot of people, like that French politician and like others, have said like, oh, that's unfair how Americans, there is this like stupid fucking libtard piece of shit that, thank God, he got fired from, he's this cartoonist that got fired from the Herald. His name is like D. Adler, that guy. And I had this thread.
What a name.
I had this thread where I like totally owned him, right? And he was saying like in his last cartoon, it was a picture. It was like on a stage where it was like the globe of the world saying to America, "Oh my God, you're undecided, really?"
Oh, yeah.
And I had this thread about like the Canadian view of America. Right?
Let me get it.
So,
I'll pull it up.
Yeah, but the point being is that like in a weird way, America does have influence over world affairs, but to say that like the rest of the world gets a say over Americans of like determining the fate of their own nation. First of all, we have to like admit, like, if we even believe that Americans are going to determine the fate of this next election, that's up in the air anyways. But say for argument's sake that they're not going to pull a 2020, there's no fortification. Okay, fine, whatever. So Americans still have a right to determine their own fate because they are directly impacted by Washington, by the Washington regime. But it is kind of like a strange thing that a lot of like Redditors jerk off themselves about when it comes to like thought probes or morality tales of like, oh, like, do the rest of the world have a say because the rest of the world's also affected by this election? I mean, it's all bullshit, right? But like, I still think it is like at the base, if you can separate it from like the Reddit nonsense of like transnationalism and like, oh, like, if you have an effect over someone, of course that person should have a democratic say. That's all bullshit, right? But it is, yeah, there you go. That's the one. Yeah. So, but it is a very interesting.
I like how happy America looks in that comic.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. But it is a very interesting thought experiment to say that, okay, this election definitely does determine the course of geopolitics, at least for the next 4 years, maybe for the next 8 years, maybe for the next few decades. But at the same time, but at the same time, to say that like we live in this like weirdo globalist system where the rest of the world can like dictate to America, like, oh, like because it affects us too, man. Like that's like libtard, that's like libtard bullshit. Like that's, but at the end of the day, if Trump can deliver more of a non-interventionist foreign policy, it's sort of like the Europeans that hate Trump, but yet they want independence, at least somewhat. Like we were saying before, they really don't want independence. They don't like really want the implications, the weight of their own freedom, to use a Nietzschean term, right? So like, but at the end of the day, even if Kamala gets in, in a weird way, for as much as they hate Trump, the European elites are going to get, the elites around the world actually will get shafted more with Kamala than they will with Trump. I mean, at least you hope, right? I personally think that Trump, I mean, for as much as he talks up Zionism or whatever, and he says, like, we have to support Israel, I think he's going to say to Bibi, he's like, listen, Bibi, you killed about 100,000 of them. Like, you know, it's time to give it up. It's not good. It's not good. You know, it's not, we got to, like, business as usual. Like the Saudis, we got to get the Saudis to sell us more oil. That's going to be Trump's, you know, but we're going to drill, baby, drill. But the Saudis are also not going to have to, like, go into the hands of the BRIC nations. It's like, that's the weird sort of, like, pro-America, you know, we're going to impose tariffs. Tariffs, the most beautiful word in the English language, Joe. But it's, you know, but at the same time, we have to convince Saudi Arabia not to, like, welch on the deal that they've been given since the 1950s. So, you know, it's a very precarious position. But, I mean, I hope he wins. But I don't know, maybe in the back of my mind, I think that Trump, the ideal, is more spiritually powerful than, you know, if Trump goes in there and he's not allowed to do anything. So, I don't know.
I mean, this is going to sound extremely petty, and I agree with pretty much everything you just said there. But, I mean, even beyond, as somebody who does the show, the argument for the whole geopolitical situation, I just think
Zionism's the most poetic word in the English language, Joe.
I just think about having to be hectored by Kamala Harris for 4 years.
Oh, God. No, but they okay. Apart from, like, the necessary things like the State of the Union address, I think if Kamala wins, they're just gonna, like, put her away for 4 years, like they did with Joe right now. They're gonna, like, send her to, like, a bake party or whatever. They're gonna, like, send her to celebritards like Oprah, but she's gonna be like, she's not gonna be as quiet as a church mouse for 4 years. And then the
Kamala
Democrats
will have the first Xanax-fueled pajama party.
Yeah.
Like with all her wine mom friends, you know.
Yeah, like one of the best tweets I ever saw was a Black Twitter person. And, you know, Black Twitter, they're, like, ideologically mind poisoned by leftard ideas. But there was this one
Democratic plantation.
Yeah. They were, like, always the first to get hit with progressive ideas, right? Like transgender stuff. But anyways, there was this one tweet. The guy said that Kamala looks like them light skins that's got a brown butthole. And it was like,
what the? Oh my God.
What the fuck? Like, it's really no, but Kamala, they're gonna basically, like, sequester her like a mentally deranged, incestuous royal family child in the attic. You know, she's gonna be a flower in the attic for, like, 4 years, and then that will give the Democrats enough time to, like, get a semi-competent person.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I thought about. Like, if the Democrats were serious about being Trump, they would have convinced Gavin Newsom to come on board.
Yeah, no doubt.
You know, there is that. Like, what faction held him back? Was it really him? I mean, I don't know. I could. He seems like, you know, a Hollywood version of the kind of American president that they would want.
Oh yeah, and in many ways, I know I've touched on this before, I do think that they're waiting for Trump to bear the responsibility of everything that's going to go wrong in the next 4 years. Because regardless of who wins, there are certain events that have been set into motion that are going to come to a head that are going to be very difficult to manage. I'm not saying they can't be managed, but there are probably going to be some losses, particularly economically, along the way. And maybe Democrats have realized, or at least some Democrats have realized, it would be better for Donald Trump to have to bear the responsibility of the past, I don't know, let's just cast a wide net, past 20 years of policy. So then we can come in with our clean-cut white guy, Gavin Newsom, who's going to appeal to a national electorate, and have him come in and save the day.
Yeah. But then you never know. I mean, there is, like, an immense amount of enthusiasm for Trump. I mean, there is, like, I'm even looking at this New York Madison Square Garden rally, and, like, they had Elon, and they're, like, chanting Elon. Like, it's like pro wrestling. It's like, or like a it's like a, you know, it's like a hockey game. Like when fucking when the New York Rangers, like when Jacob Trouba just like nails somebody with a shoulder illegally, like it's yeah, you see like I remember there was this moment. I think it was it must have been the Air Canada Center. It was Wade Belock against Jensen from New Jersey, and like the crowd was going amazing. Like they were just like chanting, and like with every single fist, it was a huge fight. And like and Joe Bowen said, just listen to that crowd, right? They were chanting like Elon, 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 Elon. So I think like it's like a sport event. It's like hockey or wrestling or football. But what's very interesting is that I think it's because, for rightfully or wrongfully, and I don't exactly trust him, right? Because at the end of the day, Elon has his own, agenda as a Silicon Valley creature. But he has delivered like a modicum of freedom for a lot of people online. And whether you want to say like they did that because like the regime realizes that it's a Skinner box or whatever, but there is like a lot of like mental contagions that have been unleashed by people like us that have reached the national level. And I think that that's why they're like so emphatically praising this like one creature of the Silicon Valley, like the Californian ideology, because he does in a weird way represent this rival elite that wants to like, that will in essence free up a form of conservatism or whatever for whatever reason they have down the pipe. I mean, there could be like some nefarious reason, like, they need like white guys to go to war again or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, at least temporarily, like there's something to seeing like Elon and all these guys and Trump and Hulk Hogan, speaking of pro wrestling, and like, it's like, and Dana White, because UFC, they've like, UFC is basically what like Attitude Era WWE, WWF was back in like the 90s, right? Like it's the real, like that's what young, sensitive young men, that's what they watch, and so I think like seeing like that, Elon Musk and Dana White and Hulk Hogan, they're like next to Donald Trump. And it's like this masculine force that's tapped into like this tapestry of like a particular like 80s macho capitalist kitsch Americana that Trump is like so good at playing up. Like that's very powerful to people. And it's powerful to me. Like when I see those edits, it's like, some of them bring a tear to my eye. Like when Trump said, you will be ignored no longer. It's, and like that hope, that embodiment, right? But I think that, like, unfortunately, like if Trump does lose, there will have to be people that you call cynical black pillars, like people like James Kirkpatrick and like people like Scott Greer that have like serious political analysis to say, okay, maybe we have to like rein ourselves in. Maybe we have to say like there has to be some serious soul searching if Trump loses. Like that's my fear. I mean, it does look like he's, there's a good likelihood that he's going to win, but you never know. And I do think that you have to separate all of that enthusiasm and all of that like revival of like 90s and early 2000s chud American white male culture, because that's what it is. It's like, again, it's like, Attitude Era, metal was good, like Woodstock 99, like the chuds are back. We got UFC and Hulk Hogan and Elon Musk and, rockets and space travel and space fascism. It's like, the white man is back, baby. But like, but is the white man back? That's like, so I think if he wins, then it'll shore up our abilities to influence people on the right. But if he loses, then there's going to be some serious soul searching about the nature of regime politics. And so, yeah, I think it's either way. I mean, either way, there's opportunities in anything. But I mean, certainly Kamala is not going to be present if she wins for the next 4 years. I mean, those people are not voting for Kamala Harris. As we all know, they're voting for, like you guys said, they're voting for the state ideology. That's what it is. It's a very reactionary force. I had this thread on Twitter replying to that boomer lib. Like that basically like the current transnational progressive world order, it's the most reactionary force in the pure sense of that word reactionary. They basically want an eternal present, but that eternal present is like 2009 forever. 2009, like Obama, Hope Corps, stomp, clap, hey, soillennial aesthetics, culture forever. Like that's their utopia, just like a more intense version of the present. And so, like all like the like millenarian, forward-thinking ideas of the progressive left, whether it be Marxism or socialism, that's gone. There's no more dialectic of history anymore. They're thoroughly presentist. They thoroughly just like wish that their utopia is like some version of like late-term Obama 2009 forever. Like that's basically their worldview. And a lot of these libtards, that's what they're voting for. They're not voting for Kamala Harris. They don't think that she's like Obongo 2.0. Like, you know, Obama is gone. Like Obama's spiritual power is over with. Like his speeches are terrible. Like it's the black men, like black people, they think that Obama's like some like light-skinned Indonesian that's like condescending to them. And it's
I love it when they revolt against him at his speeches and they all get up at it. I think it was
Obongo.
It was during the 2016 election when they kept praising him for quote unquote being able to control the crowd while they were just like where they were just like completely just out of control. And they were like I think it was during the whole Hillary Bernie thing when that was at like its peak, so you had like a lot of pissed off Bernie bros who were just letting Obama have it at some campaign speech, and he was like, "Whoa, let's my fellow Americans lip smack, let's calm down here," and they touted this as this great unifying moment.
Yeah. Oh man.
You know, it's interesting, Gio, listening to you because it reminds me a little bit of the podcast I listened to, you know, the old Glory Club, their Pony Express podcast. And, you know, Pete and Charlemagne were both, like you, very earnest and adamant about the necessity of Trump winning, that the consequences of him losing are actually really great. They, like you, agreed that if he loses, they're going right after Elon Musk. They'll be very emboldened. You know, elections do, you know, for right or for wrong, they do establish a kind of right to rule, and they legitimize it. And you know, I think if Trump loses, however, I think faith in American institutions will deteriorate even more. Even my liberal friend who came over agrees that there is no faith in the institutions anymore. She even agrees because of COVID that the health institutions, which were one of the last institutions that people lost faith in, they have lost faith in. The other thing that was interesting from the Pony Express was both Charlemagne and Pete said that, you know, like the Cold War era, there are only two games in town. And it might seem to Americans incoherent right now what this resistance is. And, you know, don't listen to black pillars who are telling you that actually Russia is just as gay. He goes, they're not. At the same time, this resistance is kind of like really the only chance to change direction for America. Like you, they're not totally sure how much they buy Trump's sincerity towards Zionism.
Yeah.
Also because, you know, a lot of his, yes, I know he moved the, you know, the American embassy in the capital of Israel, or helped establish or legitimize it that it was in Jerusalem and not Tel Aviv anymore. And he recognized the Golan Heights, even though like no one else did except Israel and maybe, I don't know, some island in the Pacific. You know, it's always something like that. But I thought it was interesting only because, like, on the show, Constantine and I have also been saying that you know, the third world isn't coming for you. You know, like or the global south or whatever you want to call it. Like, they have a common enemy, like with a lot of red-blooded Americans.
they came short of sort of naming what that enemy is and the ethnic makeup of it. But so anyways, I just thought it was interesting. Again, if people have time, it's a long stream, but it's a very impassioned one and a well articulated one. Many of the points, hearing those, I don't always have time to listen to a lot of the podcasts. I work very long hours, but and I spend a lot of time for the show, for our show. But if people have time, I would say check it out. It's pretty good. They surprised me with some of their positions.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about that a little. I think it was on Thursday night, and yeah, I can't really add much more to what you said, but I would certainly co-sign your statement there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But are
But,
there any other major topics that we had lost out on? Because we're pushing the 3-hour mark right here.
What else has been going on in the news? I mean, it seems the election's just like taken over everything.
Yeah, because we got rid of the big geopolitical stuff with Ukraine. We even touched a little bit on Israel and Iran, which I think is still a developing situation, so I don't want to say too much for the time being. We definitely covered the election news thoroughly, and we were able to get onto, let's just say, some of the less news items into greater analysis, to really talking about the root of these things, which like I says, one of the reasons that I always like to bring you on, I think GSP as well. But yeah, that is all I had, unless there's really any last minute pressing news that we missed out on. I don't know if there's been any, say, developments during the show that either of you have picked up on. There's nothing I have that's really noteworthy, but if you two have it, certainly.
Yeah, I don't have. I just have a few details about Israel's incursion into southern Lebanon. Now,
Oh yeah.
I saw the Israelis saying that they've completed their work in southern Lebanon and will be retreating. I saw it on Telegram. I don't know if that's true. Like, I saw it from some sources that I trust that are generally very good about this. The Israelis are suffering larger losses there. Like, yes, Hezbollah is losing more, but Hezbollah has not slowed down. On Thursday, I read that at least 32 soldiers had been killed. There was a map of over 12 tanks that were destroyed in southern Lebanon,
Holy
Merkava
shit.
tanks of the IDF. And then today, 4 confirmed dead. The day before, 5. The day before that, another 5. I wonder, and at the same time, Netanyahu is asking Iran not to retaliate because his retaliation on Iran was limited in scope, right? I mean, yeah, I can understand for some people looking on this thing is it's a bit farcical, but I agree with you that I don't think the conflict with Iran is over, and if it bears out that Israel wants to leave southern Lebanon, then it might be to deal with Iran. But of course, you can't just go to Iran, right? And Iran has proven that it has deterrence and that it's determined to get more deterrence. And like I say, this naval exercise with Saudi Arabia kind of cements the deal. Like, that's a clear signal to the Americans about which bases America can actually use in the Middle East. If they wanted a bombing campaign on Iran, Turkey is not going to play ball. I don't think.
No,
What does
they've
that
outright
mean?
said they
Maybe
won't.
Azerbaijan? I don't know.
Yeah. But like, what is Israel's endgame besides like the usual like full-scale war with Iran? Like, what is their realistic? Like, what are they just going to kill all of them in Gaza? Like, is it, you know what I mean? Like, it seems
Maybe.
nonsensical at this point. Like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Are
I
the
mean,
active? are the activists still energized? But I mean, I guess they always are against Israel. But like, I don't know. Like,
I mean, have you seen the way the Swedes and the Germans beat up on these activists?
Oh,
Like,
really?
oh yeah. I mean,
Oh, wow.
I mean the Swedish police, the German police, like they would do things like a lot of these people probably also marched in, you know, the climate change campaigns and stuff like that,
Oh yeah.
right? But nothing happens to them. And you know, interestingly, that's what I also told my friend that visited us tonight, and I said, what you saw in 2023 and 2024 was that all the special interest groups of the regime that the regime does take good care of and voices their concerns and so on and so on, that when it comes down between interests for Israel and, I don't know, interests for gender rights or whatever, or, you know, minority rights or what have you, Israel is going to trump that. Israel is far, far, far more important. And I
Them
said, look what happened to the dean
BIPOC
of
trans
Harvard,
women of
that woman
color.
Gay, who was fired.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I shouldn't mention e-drama, but I was nah, never mind. I'm not going to mention it. That's too...
Actually, I do have a little bit of.
It involves a Croatian cigarette smuggler, but like.
Never heard of him.
I was criticized for saying like I'm not a big fan of Chris Rufo, you know, but that's whatever, man. You take your lumps.
You're just jealous because you don't have a Vietnamese wife.
yeah, but no, but that's I don't know if we want to cover that e-drama. I talked a little bit about it.
I don't know that much about it, and frankly, it's just more the same kind of like runaround that.
Well,
perhaps if it was earlier in the show, I would, but at this point, I don't think I have the energy for it.
Yeah, you don't have the energy to talk about the recent Chris Rufo versus this brunette guy.
No,
I talked a little bit about in the core report, the recent episode of my Patreon, but in Substack. But I mean,
if you have a little bit you want to say, I certainly won't stop you. But
but I think it's irrelevant because, like, I definitely like. I mean, I'm not like I agree with Oren McIntyre, like my good friend, because like this brunette guy, like he has gone after friends of mine, and he does seem kind of crazy. But at the end of the day, like, to say that like Chris Rufo isn't like in the pocket of certain like, you know, Zionist interests. I mean, the Bill Ackerman story that like he didn't want to like expose Bill Ackerman's wife. I mean, I believe it. Like it's a known fact. Like and I think like the problem, and I've said this before, like the problem is that the E-right is like so addicted to like the seeming pretense and aesthetics of any victory that they can get. And a lot of it is just basically just that, the aesthetics of victory. We're so starved of it that you're willing to like back at best a Pyrrhic victory against some like Harvard black woman woke tard that will then just be replaced by like a Jewish woke tard. So it's like, did you really, the victory is not really like this, like, oh, like we did it ourselves and like we attacked the regime and like we infiltrated regime politics, and Chris Rufo has this like winning formula to like collect scalps. It's like when in reality, it's an intra-ethnic conflict among woke tards that Chris Rufo just happened to stumble into. And the E-right happened to go along with because we have this need to express that like, oh, someone's like actually doing the work. But really that work is re-entrenching the same intra-ideological and intra-ethnic conflict. I mean, I'm getting tired. That's why I'm getting more nastier as things go on. But like,
oh, that's great. We should go on another hour then.
Yeah. No, but the point being is that like, I listen. I don't have anything personal against Chris Rufo. I don't have anything personal against this. While I do, I don't agree with this brunette guy, going out of his way to attack certain friends of mine, including Oren McIntyre. But at the same time, like, you can't deny what's right in front of you. It doesn't matter that the guy, you don't like him. If he's spitting truth, truth is truth, right? You know, I think, okay, if Rufo can do some university program in Florida, that's great. That's great. But don't go and say that the regime's going to crumble any minute because you happen to get rid of one woke tard. that was out the door anyway because of the being pro-Palestine. So,
please, I hate that about the right. Like, if there was ever an opportunity to see your foes like destroy each other, that was a missed opportunity. Instead, it was like, well, he was my enemy too. So, like, it's just, it was again, like, there's just no political acuity. There's no affinity for real strategic thinking. My favorite is when certain e-celebs go completely into bizarro world.
And they all have to defend each other. Yeah.
I saw just a clip. I haven't had time to watch the whole thing, but I saw a clip where two e-right celebs, granted one of them is more well-known than the other, was talking about how the other Aryans have to move east. And this includes Italians and Slavs.
No!
Because, wait, because the English and Germanics in Europe need more Lebensraum. This was like literally one of the dumbest things. I'm going like, imagine living in that world where you think like that's a possibility.
You're
like,
LARPing 1940s.
I know you're young. But like, you don't have enough years in your life where that is ever going to happen. And then I thought, like, what if there was like an early Bronze Age podcast, right? And it's the Cheddar Man show. These Yamnaya guys moving in here. You can call them Belbika Quarterwear all you want. I know what they are. They're just Yamnaya scum from the east.
Sea peoples with attitude.
Sea people with that. Sea people with that.
Oh my god, that's great. Yeah. No, but
I just thought, like, wow, what a luxury to.
Imagine if Twitter was in the Bronze Age. That would be. No, but like the point being is that, like, not to like relitigate the Claudine Gay bullshit, but like, it really did benefit the left more than it benefited the right. Because think of it this way: not only do you reaffirm Zionist control over anti-Palestine, like pro-Palestinian protesters, but you also have a convenient scapegoat to where woke-tards and like bi-POC, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, writer activist types, they can say that like the evil fascist right-wing Chris Rufo, he was the one that got the Poe innocent walk woman of color Claudine Gay fired, when in reality it's like on both ends they cover their bases. But it's like nobody saw that at the time because they were just enamored by like, oh well, we got the head of Harvard to resign because she's like a woke tard that doesn't like Israel, so it's like, I don't know, it's just
like the regime is literally in conflict, it's infighting, and these idiots like want to resolve it for them. Like,
it's a pity both sides can't lose.
It's no, because that's what I mean. Like the optimal, it's so true, exactly. Like the optimal condition is if like libtard pro-Palestinian people and the state of Israel loses. So it's like, but that's not going to happen. I mean, that's not going to.
Well, what about this kind of is tangential to my story of Civic Nat Hitler. Stu.
Yeah. Awesome Chungus.
You think those guys weren't woke 5 years ago before they converted to Orthodoxy? Huh? Now they know who runs the show in America. Like,
holy shit!
Okay,
I'm not having some goddamn Yamnaya descendant joining my club. Like
those
fucking Tartars.
Okay, I'm sorry, but this is completely unrelated, but I think it's the perfect thing to end the show on. And this is a quote from Andrei Yermak, saying,
"Oh God,
the peace conference first advice to NATO. In fact, we're at war with North Korea now."
Oh God. Yeah. Please come in. Please help.
Oh, the North Korean thing. I guess we could end the show on that.
Yeah.
Like, the mongrel hordes are going to repopulate Ukraine for the Russians.
Oh, yeah.
That's like the narrative.
I mean, basically they're going to capture Azov guys And in a year, if one of Kim Jong-un's relatives die, they're gonna have to do the performative crying at the funeral as punishment.
Put it this way, there was this meme going around a few weeks ago. People have to apologize to so and so, and like usually like a picture of Trump, a picture of like, I don't know, some like esoteric fascist. I was gonna tweet out like a lot of people, they're gonna have to apologize to Zionovsky. I think he was right about pretty much everything. I mean, a lot of people are gonna have to apologize to Zionovsky. They have to like
He's good.
Go to his grave. Yeah. They're gonna have to like go to a vigil. A lot of people are gonna have to apologize to Zionovsky. So they should have like that meme. There should be like a shirt that says like "You miss me yet?" and it's like Zionovsky. It's like where he's pointing his finger. That's such a great photo.
It's in Cyrillic.
Yeah,
it's in Cyrillic.
There's the one where he's debating like these really dual citizen TV hosts, and he's just like Yevray. Israel.
That's a good like Russians with attitude merch idea. I should DM Khalil that. Like it's like in Cyrillic, like, are you miss me yet? It's like, oh my god. So good. But yeah, the mongrel hordes, they're taking over Ukraine. What are you gonna do?
Oh,
it's
course.
just
yeah. Yeah, those Korean trench diggers, I'm sure they're here to stay. Just like those construction workers in Mariupol from Tajikistan, they didn't all go back home after the construction project was on. And once again, this is not to downplay some of the migration issues Russia has had, which we have talked about many times on the show.
Yeah, of course.
Don't get us wrong. But point being is, like, it's not a one-for-one situation in the West. And yes, of course, it's a problem there. I've talked to a lot of Russians about this. Across the political spectrum, these aren't the people who are like RDK, like, oh, I'm going to fight for Ukraine because they're more racist. Not those clowns, not those fools. I mean, like, actual, like, normal Russian people who are more or less would agree with a lot
like
of stuff we're saying.
you would think they would, instead of jealousy, you would think that they would be cheering them on when they deport them, or when then 33% of oblasts in Russia have stopped them from coming over, and now the Russians are going to use digital ID to keep track of all migrants. Like, you would think you would cheer them on, but they don't. And the reason they don't is because it's just jealousy. It's just pure jealousy. It's just it's just a total hate on for them. Anyways, I sent you in the chat. You miss me yet?
Really?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Let's see. That's
Let's see this. Put this in the chat. Yeah.
You miss me yet?
There's this quote. There's this great quote. This is from Zionovsky, Council of Europe, 1999. He says, "I'm telling you, you're going to bomb Kiev. You will. This is your plan. It's in your NATO plan to bomb Kiev. There's even a date next to it."
Oh my god.
He was right about everything. You miss me yet? You miss me. I'm gonna tweet that right now. I'm gonna take that picture of Zionovsky. You miss me yet? Oh man, that's funny. He was right about everything. No, but it's just like, I love it, like fringe political figures that you just, that have a charm, It's just like
they do.
Like Trump really is the Zionovsky of America.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is actually.
When you really think of it.
I think you're bang on.
Yeah. Oh man, I should go on Russians with Attitude. We could talk about it.
Oh, I'd love
like
it.
Trump's the Zionovsky of America. That'd be something. Anyways,
Yep.
Yeah, it's getting late. It's 3-hour mark, over 3 hours. So, oh man.
I'll just leave this
Thank you
right here
for coming,
those of you
Gio.
who
That
can-
was
Yeah.
amazing. this was so much fun. I mean, it's always fun, but this was
yeah.
really amazing.
You know the crystal meme? Oh, I shouldn't say this is too vulgar. It's too vulgar. But like, anyways, you know I deleted the tweet though. The crystal, you know the crystal meme? Apparently, they have like these hippie new age girls. They make crystal dildos.
Oh no!
They have
Oh,
crystal
God.
dildos, and I tweeted a picture of one. It was someone was selling them on Twitter, and I quote tweeted. I said, "Imagine sealing a libtard up in this thing for 50,000 years." My crystal dildo.
Dark, very dark.
Very dark. Oh man,
I
gross
think-
hippie chicks gonna.
I think that's a great note to leave it on. Let the people just
Yeah,
ruminate
the
with that
crystal
image.
dildo, yeah.
Yeah.
But any last minute chilling you want to do?
Yeah, like go to my patreon.com/Productions, substack.com/Shios Content Corner. Both start at $5 a month, and you get like hours and hours of content. I just animation industry, the history of animation in the West, and other things too. We talk about like Black design, Tumblr kids, fucking.
Yeah, for people who don't know,
Arts.
Geo's a very accomplished artist. I don't know if people know that, and he has a very considerable knowledge of art theory, art history, a lot of great stuff. If you're interested in that,
Yeah,
and not a typical E-Right angle on it. I think a far more elucidating one. Then follow Geo on any of those platforms.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do another Man of Art episode, either when I find the time, because they do take like a lot of research, either on James Tissot or Mark Tovey. So we'll see what happens. I did one on Nikolai Roerish. I did one on Paul Cezanne, and so I might do one.
would be an interesting one to contrast them with Degas.
Yeah, that
because they went, they knew each other, right? And they went on very different paths. So
I did this video on Toulouse-Lautrec once, and about romance, and it was about this like it was from like a tweet from that Going Godward person, but she like never followed me back.
He's a nice guy.
Yeah, like it was.
I like him.
Yeah, but anyway, so yeah, it's always a slog, and Digital Archipelago after the election, we'll probably have it on Wednesday, like because I know like Old Glory Cub, they're going to stream during the election. I personally think it will take like beyond midnight. They're gonna do something, it's gonna take a while.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You never know really until like 8 a.m. next morning.
Well, I just hope they have the election results in before Shabbat.
Yeah. Oh my God. So yeah, man, we'll
Trump could ruin my Hanukkah, that's for sure. Win or lose.
I wonder what the Jewish people in America, I wonder what their voting record. I mean, they're a solid Democrat. So
solid Democrat.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you want to dig
there
up
with
like
black women.
Unless you want to dig up like the Hasidics from New York, the people who make Five-ish. Of course, Five-ish says "Make America Great Again." That's.
I love how Five-ish went from like a Jewish thing to like the Chinese are doing AI edits of Five-ish.
Oh yeah. He went from a Hasidic from Lakewood, New Jersey, to Chinese AI slob. What a transformation! What a transformation!
All those like Italians and Jewish people in New York and New Jersey, they gotta.
If anyone wants to know any more about Five-ish lore, just get in touch with me. I know an embarrassing amount about Five-ish. I'll just leave that as the last note on the show.
I remember the one Come Town episode when Adam Friedland, he's like, I don't think like people outside should know about this. That was funny. That was so funny. Remember Dasha was gonna marry Adam, but then that like fell through. Now she's gonna marry I don't know who's Dasha. I don't keep up with the lore. I mean, I lie. I do keep up with the Red Scare lore. Apparently they're at the convention or the rally in New York at Madison Square Garden, and they have like backstage passes. So maybe Trump will go on Red Scare. Like
Donald,
I remember there was this one woman, this like conservative pundit. She said like, you know, she was correct. She's like, women might decide the election because like Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn, like this is all like very male, younger male thing, like, you know, going on Aiden Ross or whatever, like Barron's telling him to like go on these podcasts. But like, she's like, you need a sympathetic woman to interview Trump, but there is no sympathetic pundit women besides Red Scare. So it's like, he would secure the women vote because like, you know, Red Scare, they got this like parasocial relationship where they're kind of like for homely femcells, they're like, imagine if the hot bitchy girl is my best friend that like gossips about other girls. That's like the relationship that they have with like their female audience. It's like, I'm friends with the hot, gossipy, bitchy Eastern Slavic women, and like they're my friends, even though I'm a femcel. That's the whole thing. And of course, men, I don't know. That's they're all right. I listen to them occasionally. But,
no.
You know, Trump on Red Scare. Red Scare Zionism, folks. That's gonna be. Imagine that, Trump on Red Scare. Anyways, what a thought to leave off.
But I will say
Scare.
one last thing because I haven't said it yet. Give this man your money.
Yeah, for all these hot takes.
And many more.
Trump on Red Scare. Trump on Red Scare.
And of course,
why do I keep saying that? That's not.
And of course, Gio, thank you once again for coming on.
One day I'll be on Red Scare.
Always maybe. It's
Maybe.
always a fun time.
Yeah.
And you know what? Well, I'm sure we'll have you back sooner rather than later.
Well, probably after the election, yeah.
So,
yeah.
We'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Yeah.
Goodbye and take care.